All right. Good morning, everybody. It's 9 o'clock, a little after 9 o'clock. We probably need to go ahead and get going. We've got a lot to talk about, and so we want to go ahead and get kicked off. But before we do, it's a great honor to be here on Georgia Southwestern State University's campus. And so before we kick off, we're going to ask the president of the university to come forward and just kind of give us a welcome and let us know what he's got going on here at the university. So President Weaver, thank you for allowing us to be here today, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman, and I want to welcome you and all of the members of this committee and all of our guests. It's my honor and privilege on behalf of the faculty, the staff, and the students of this great university to welcome you to the fastest growing college or university south of Atlanta in the state of Georgia. We are, there's 13 of us that reside down here south of Atlanta. 8 of those 13 haven't grown at all in the last 5 years. In fact, they've gotten smaller. 5 of us have grown. Georgia Southwestern has grown 8.6% during that time, and the next closest to us, Valdosta State, has grown by 3.2%. So not only are we number one, but we're more than double the next best institution down here in South Georgia. And we've done that by focusing on 3 things: adjusting our academic programs to meet the economic and cultural needs of our region. We have focused on creating a culture where our students, some marginal, some first time, some inexperienced, can be successful. And third, we've kept our prices and our costs low, and we've increased scholarships. And you put those things together, and you're helping our local communities create, develop, and produce the workforce that's going to keep South Georgia moving in the right direction. And so we're very proud of what we've done. And your investments in this institution are what has helped us create that culture where students can be successful. I know that you all approve huge projects, sometimes 40, 50, hundreds of millions of dollars. But I want to tell you that you've done 2 things here at Georgia Southwestern in the last 5 years that have helped us dramatically change the culture of this institution. One of them was $3.2 million, which helped us renovate what we call Kane Central. And it is now a place where every student, no matter their academic ability or their family history, they come to that building, and everything that they need to be successful is now located in one location. We could not have done that without that $3 million investment. The other project is a $3.5 million investment that you made in renovating the Flory Chapel Gymnasium. It is now a fitness center. It's the old, we were talking earlier, it's the old gymatorium. And we have turned it into an incredible fitness center that is now a place where students have an opportunity to gather and create the culture of success where they work together and help each other along. So don't ever think that those that you might think are of small investments, $3 million, $3.5 million, $5 million. You might think those are negligible or not even worth attention, but I can promise you, those investments in a school like this make a huge difference in the lives of our students and the ability of those students to be successful. So we thank you for that, and we thank you for the work that you're going to do, and we hope that we're supporting the rural growth of Georgia, and we want to be a part of it. So if there's any way that we can do that in the future, we hope you'll let us know. Thank you for being here, and hope you have a great day. I've got to run. We've got one of my predecessors, Dr. Capitan, passed away last week, and his funeral is here in town this morning at 10 o'clock, so I'm going to have to step out. But if there's anything that you need while you're here, we have folks around today that will make sure you have everything you need to have a good meeting. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to we have one of your graduates who is a member of this committee, Chairman Powell, and he was late like he was back in 1973. But we just want to make sure you say hey to one of your outstanding, successful graduates.
One of the things they do when you become president is they give you a key that opens all the doors. And so one of the things that I've been able to do is look at some of the files of some of our previous students,
We got
I just want you to know that the statute of limitations have run out, and we have cleaned the slate. So you are good to go, and you're welcome back on campus.
Oh, man. Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah.
Representative Chokas, did you show up? You want to give us a quick welcome here before we get started with our meeting?
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate the Rural Development Council being here today, and I appreciate the 2 hours you've given me to welcome you guys. Thank you very much this morning. No one said anything. Everybody fell asleep. With the welcome to Americus, Georgia. Welcome to Georgia Southwestern State University. We appreciate y'all being here and the important work that you do. Alan, the president said that the statute of limitations ran out on some of the other activities, but campus is a book that you need to return before you leave today. The Rural Development Council, and especially the broadband and what y'all have done in bringing broadband to the rural part of the state, and I'm preaching to the choir because it's so important, but it's been said that it's an information highway. And I beg to differ with that. I think of it more of information railroad because of the sheer volume and bulk of information that's being transmitted through broadband today is just voluminous. And it's necessary for our part of the country. It affects, obviously, agribusiness, which is huge in our area, but it also affects the quality of life. I mean, you can go and be in a deer stand in the morning and work in the afternoon, or vice versa, work in the morning and go in a deer stand in the afternoon, but you got a great quality of life in rural Georgia. As many of y'all know that live in the rural part of the state. So I want to thank you all for being here. Especially thank you to Pineland for what they're doing locally and how they've expanded broadband in our area. And it's just great seeing you guys. Thank you very much. Welcome to Americus.
Good deal. Thank you, Chokas. Thank you for helping host us here, and it's always good to be in Americus. We were here not too long ago and had a really great meeting as well. So this time we're going to go ahead and move forward with our meeting. And I want to ask Dr. David Bridges to come up with the Rural Center and give his report. Okay, there he is. I was looking for you, Dr. Bridges. Come on down. Dr. Bridges and his team have done a phenomenal job with the Center for Rural Prosperity, which was created by this council. And they've been working throughout the state and got a bricks and mortar location here in South Georgia and also one in North Georgia as well. So they've been doing a lot of great things, and we just want to get an update from Dr. Bridges and also hear how we can help them going forward. So Dr. Bridges, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. It's a pleasure to be here. Given the nature of the agenda and the tight timeline today, I'm not going to use a PowerPoint. I submitted a cumulative report to members of the House Rural Development Council last week. If you've got questions, I'd be happy to entertain them publicly or privately. But what I wanted to do was give a real quick look into the future and introduce our staff. So our staff is sitting over here on the right front row. We got Janet Cochran, who is our North Georgia project manager, works out of our office in Ellijay. Scott Blunt, who many of you know, is associate director, and he works out of Waycross. And Casey Bean, right there, she works Southwest Georgia, lives, I don't know whether I can't remember, your house may split Doherty and Baker County. It's pretty close. And then to her left, over by the window, is Mary Catherine Gaston. She's not a full-time employee, but she's a contract writer. She is a story spinner. If you ever need a story spun, a popular article written, that lady right there can do a 30-minute interview and write a story like you wouldn't believe. That's our group. We have a communications consultant that we pay as a contract that does a lot of our communications work. We have shifted a little bit over the years. We're 3.5, 4 years into making. In that report that we submitted to you members, there's a section in there called our operational outline. That was developed as we opened our doors in 2018 and somewhat guided our work. We are in the process of writing a new strategic plan that shifts a little bit from our original operational plan. We have over time become myopically focused on project management, outcome-based project management. We don't do leadership development. We don't do community capacity building. We don't do certification programs. We do projects. And we have done quite a few. I'll give you a little highlight and then entertain questions. We have undertaken 34 major projects during our time, investing time, effort, personal resources, and money. 15 of those 34 projects have been completed and cover the state from the northwestmost corner all the way to the Florida line. We have 17 of those 34 projects that are ongoing projects that we continue to invest time, effort, and money in. And there are 2 projects that we suspended. Sometimes you just think something's a good idea and you start it, and after a while you just realize it's not going to work. So I won't say we divorced ourselves, but we legally separated ourselves from those projects. They might come back up one day, we might do it. Among those projects, there were 34 individual counties served. There were 2 projects that serviced multiple counties around the state. Won't name them, they're just scattered around, or we can discuss them with you if you like. We had 2 projects that served basically all of the counties of southwest Georgia, and we have 10 projects that have impact or potential impact across the state of Georgia. In addition to those projects, we invested an enormous amount of time in 21 preparing 16 grant proposals for small communities for ARP funding through the Georgia Cares program. My team kind of looks the other way when we talk about how much time we invested in those proposals. Unfortunately, most of them weren't funded. 2 were funded out of the 16, and an additional one was partially funded. Those projects we're trying to get across the finish line. We've got a project in Warthen that we just made an announcement on, small unincorporated community in Washington County that had a drinking water well problem, and we hopefully will have a new well drilled and installed in that community sometime in the spring. We're working with the small town of Parrott, Georgia, which happened to be my hometown. They had a backup well that was down and needed repair. We got some funding for that. But we spent a lot of time on those projects this past year. Some of the projects that weren't funded we have picked up and will be carrying forward as a center. We have already funded a project in Harris County that we submitted for ARP funding that was not successful. We have recently funded another project in Miller County with the hospital there that we submitted for ARP funding that was not funded. So quickly, where do we go in the future and what do we do? We concluded about 3 years ago that if you're going to have any chance of economic development or revitalization in rural Georgia, there are 3 components that you have got to address. Because in many of these counties, there simply is an insufficient population of childbearing age to repopulate the county. So you're going to have to import people. And you're simply not going to import young people unless you can convince them that there's 1, economic opportunity, got to be able to make a living. 2, quality education for their kids. and 3, access to health care. Those are 3 imperatives. And any one of the 3 is a heavy lift. All 3 is a almost impossible lift, but you've got to do all 3 if you're to be successful. And so we are refocusing on that. And so a couple of quick things that we're doing this year and in the coming year. We're looking for communities where there is a collective will among the chamber, the economic development personnel, the school system, and some element of health care to advance and move that community forward. We believe that we can come in then with assistance from other funding agencies, including state and federal sources and possibly private funds, and help those communities advance. So that's one area of focus. The other area of focus, we just announced a project in Randolph County with the Randolph County Development Authority, and we would be publishing some information on this concept in the coming days. We're calling it the Georgia GROWS program, not to be confused with Georgia Grown. GROWS stands for Grow Your Own Workforce Solution. There are many small businesses throughout rural Georgia who have very specific talent needs, skill needs, etc., that are not easily addressable through either the university system or the technical college system. They may be very specific needs. And I'll give you an example. We funded through the Randolph County Development Authority a project to assist Peerless Manufacturing in Shellman expand their workforce. A company that builds farm equipment, peanut handling equipment, airline baggage handling equipment. They have individuals in that plant that have been there 40 years welding and fabricating farm equipment. There is no one better to train the next generation fitter and fabricator and welder than the man or woman who's been doing it for 40 years. And they have people in that plant who are reliable, come to work every day, do cleanup, do painting, do other things, and with a bit of in-house training can be moved into a more productive role, welding, fitting, etc. And so what we're doing through this program is trying to identify some really small businesses and small communities that we can provide some grant funds through a development authority to offset some of the productivity losses that occur when you take a 40-year welder and say, we want you to spend 20% of your time training these 2 people to be a welder. There's some loss of productivity. There's some in-house training that needs to be done. So that's the approach. We think it's going to be very efficient, very cheap. There's no bricks and mortar involved. We don't buy any equipment. You know, they already have it. It's an apprenticeship program. And it's worked for centuries, and it can work again in certain circumstances. And then the final comment I want to make about what we're doing differently in the coming year, we're going to, since I have retired from ABAC as president, have a little bit more time to devote to rooting around and trying to find opportunities. We are beginning a search for private funds. We believe that private funds are what are going to be required to advance the agenda in rural Georgia. The unique challenge that we have faced for the past 3 or 4 years, and y'all all have heard me talk about it, Jimmy Lewis talk about it, and others talk about it, we have programs across the state that are designed to assist in economic development and growth and whatever, but they all come with a set of metrics and requirements that are often unachievable in small rural communities. And so what we're trying to do is find a path forward. For example, our work in Randolph County is to try to help Peerless expand from 45 employees to 50 employees, 55. It's not a big lift, not a lot of jobs, but it's a lot of jobs for that company. It's a lot of impact for that community, for a company that is currently turning down contract work because they do not have enough employees. So those are some of the things that we're going to focus on in the coming year. We appreciate your support. And with that, I'll close, and if there's any time left, take any questions you might have. Otherwise, our team will be here all day, and we're always available by phone or email or whatever way you choose to reach us. We thank you for your support and look forward to continuing our work in rural Georgia.
Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Bridges. I think we got a few questions. Representative Williams, did you have a question?
Thank you. This operates about like breakfast did, but I was listening to Randolph County and what you're trying to do, and you named the big three. Tell me how Harriet Blow or Johnny Blue, who's 18 years old, why do they stay in Randolph County when they've looked at it and only waited for the time they could get out of high school and go? Tell me, how do you keep them when you've only got 2 or 3 apprenticeship jobs?
Right. Well, what we see in that particular case, Representative, is that there are individuals who are reliable and dedicated to coming to work. Some of them very young, right out of high school. They will be there at that plant every morning at 7 o'clock, but they have no training, they have no skills. And if we can put them through some sort of short-term in-house training program that advances them from an entry-level job making minimum wage or a little more to a point where, let's say they're welding and making $20 an hour, it will make a huge difference. We are also, in this program, requiring that current employees of the businesses that we invest in develop an employee incentive program to reach out into the community and get somebody to come to work. In other words, you bring somebody to work and they complete the training program and work for 6 months, the company provides them a cash incentive to do that. We've got individuals in counties that if we do not figure out a way to train them in place and get them into work, they are going to remain permanently unemployed and on assistance because they have no capacity, often transportation limited, and no desire to leave the community to better themselves. But we've simply got to figure out a way to get those people to work.
Thank you, Dr. Bridges, for your presentation this morning. Last Monday, I hosted Economic Development Summit in my district with Chris Clark from the Georgia Chamber, as well as representatives from the Georgia Department of Community Affairs and the Georgia Department of Economic Development on the beautiful campus of Flint Energies in Reynolds, Georgia. How can I assure that the counties in my district connect with the Center for Rural Prosperity? Because you all are doing a great work, and I would like to see some of my counties listed in your booklet as counties that you're working with.
Okay, good question, Representative Bentley. I will get back to the microphone. The question was, how do you contact us and reach us? There are 3 ways. We have a website, ruralgeorgia.org. There's a project submission form on that website. You can send something to it, and our operations person, Bridget Mobley, who's not with us today, she's on jury duty, we'll contact, we'll get the team together, and we'll make a personal contact to follow up on that. The other option is to send me an email or contact me by cell phone. Many of you have my cell phone number. I'm happy to provide it. My email is the same as it's been for the last 17 years, dbridges@abac.edu. And you can send it to me or Scott Blunt, sblunt@abac.edu. And we'll be happy to come to your community at any time and sit down and work through a project. Let me give you another example on another front other than just workforce, and that's a Northwest Georgia Vanpool transportation study that we completed. There are 15 counties? 15 counties in Northwest Georgia who many of those people in those communities travel into Chattanooga and work. There are expansion opportunities in Northwest Georgia, but you've got to draw workforce from 12 or 15 counties. So transportation is an issue that was brought to our attention. We funded a transportation study. A consulting group did a fantastic job outlining the feasibility, the needs, and how we might accomplish it. And we are now in the process of engaging with USDA Rural Development to see if we can secure the funding to create a public-private partnership in Northwest Georgia that would provide workforce transportation in that region.
Dr. Bridges, will you just real quick maybe touch, I know you've got another, your actual council, your official council has finally been appointed, and you have members of the private sector, members that are actually helping guide y'all. It's not just legislative stuff. You're hearing from people, and they're all over the state, north and south, east and west, and maybe just touch on that y'all have had a meeting and that y'all are in motion, and you're getting guidance from them and what they're seeing and what they need going forward.
For the benefit of future speakers, I don't hear very well, but the speakers are in front of us, so if you want to really hear, step out there and you can hear a whole lot better than you can back here. Yes, we finally got our council fully appointed and had our first meeting in September. We have 12 members of the council that are from all over the state, really good people, and we had a great meeting with them. Two things real quick. A consensus point that came out of that meeting was encouragement for us to go to the private sector and try to get as many people in the private sector involved in this effort as possible. That assures community buy-in, et cetera. So that was a take-home message. And the other thing we're going to be doing over the next few months is we're going to be asking each of those individuals to, well, we may not do 12 meetings. I'm not a meeting person. We might do 4, divide the state into 4 regions, and ask those council members to help us identify the shakers and movers in their area of the state so that we could sit down and have a workshop, not a meeting, not talk to them, but hear from them about where the opportunities are in rural Georgia to assist in education workforce, which we call workforce, healthcare, and economic development.
Deal. Any further question? Chairman Dickey.
Dr. Bridges, could you speak briefly where your funding comes from and for the center?
All right, so the question was, where's our funding come from? Our funding comes from you, from the General Assembly. We have a budget that we're greatly appreciative of, but it's a fairly small budget. It's about $1.6 million a year. And our hope still is that we can use that funding to leverage other assets at the state and federal level. We've had limited success in doing that, but I'm optimistic right now. We did get one Georgia grant. As I said, we got 3 very small ARP grants through Georgia Cares, and we're currently working with USDA Rural Development on a couple of things that we have opportunities with. But our principal source of funds comes directly from the General Assembly.
Chairman Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Bridges, we thank you for the Randolph County funds there. That's going to make a big difference in that company there. What I want to see happen too, that maybe y'all can, you were talking about the collective will of communities coming in, and you mentioned the healthcare area. And I would hope under the rural residency program for family medicine physician training that once they finish maybe doing their 1-year residency requirement at Phoebe or in Columbus, wherever they might be, that we can move toward a 2-year program in a rural hospital. And there, if they stay long enough, we think we can keep them, especially with the example of Miller County and what's going on down there with over 700 employees in a little old county like Miller County. And so that's one thing I would like to see us focusing on, and certainly Chairman Cooper, maybe we can really look at something like this for the coming year.
Thank you, Representative Green. I know Jimmy Lewis is here. I talk with Jimmy every day. We work together on a lot of things, and health care is a major issue Representative Green, we made an investment toward the end of the year, and we'll be working with Candler County Hospital with some of the recent economic development news in the eastern part of the state. We believe that Candler County Hospital is going to see a significant demand for services. They're in an old facility that's in bad shape, and so right toward the end of the year, we made an investment there to help them get over the hump and get their surgical suite back up and running because they were losing revenue because they couldn't operate in it. And we've also made an investment there in a strategic plan that we met. Scott and I went over and met with them about 10 days ago. We hope to have a strategic plan looking forward for facilities there that we're going to be able to work with folks at USDA Rural Development to see if we can find a financial path to providing that community the kind of hospital facility that they're going to need as that Chatham brine, that eastern part of the state grows. So we'd be glad to look at others.
Anybody else? Well, thank you, Dr. Richards. Thank you for what y'all are doing, and look forward to continuing to work with you guys and watching y'all work in rural Georgia. So thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman Jasper?
Yes, sir.
You got some housekeeping stuff?
Sure
we need to go
do.
over?
David, we just appreciate your passion for rural Georgia. It's me right here. I just appreciate your passion. I always want to say that. Kate, a couple of housekeeping. Life goes on, so we have a Wi-Fi password for you, and that'll help you. That Leo Chancey is up there at the podium, and while we're talking about Leo, Sam and I can't thank Leo enough. You see us both grin and shake our heads. Leo, you're the man. We appreciate you helping us. He's been the organizer and just kind of kept Chairman Watson and I going strong, getting this all planned out.
Yep.
Thank you, Leo.
Yeah.
And he's also had lots of help too. Ashley Newton and members of the committee. Ashley, raise your hand. Where are you at? See, over there by the window.
Yep.
You need to check in with Ashley before you leave today about your mileage and all that, and she'll take care of that for us. So make sure you do that for sure. And Becky Riles has biscuits outside. I've noticed none of y'all are eating biscuits. They're out there from Hardee's, championship biscuits, and I thank you, Becky, for doing that for us.
All right. Is that the
Yeah, right there at the very bottom.
Wi-Fi is up there if anybody needs that real quick. And this time I want to ask Chairman Shaw Blackman to come on up front. He's going to give us a tax reform update. This is something that we've been working on for a while. Just as a General Assembly, we've continued to lower taxes in our state. People continue to come to our state. They want to do business here. And people want to live here too because we're lowering taxes. We have record revenues at the same time, and so we thought that it would be good for Chairman Blackman to come in and talk about this because I don't think that we're hearing enough about this. This is a great plan that he's worked very hard on, him and his committee, and so we felt that it would be good for him to come in and just kind of talk about it and give us an update on it. And Chairman Blackman, thank you for being here, and I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Chairman and all the other members of the Rural Development Council. Obviously an honor to be down here at my father and my brother's alma mater. I think President Weaver and Stephen Snyder both know that, but good to be back here, of course, as always, in the home of Chairman Chokas. Where did he go? Oh, okay, he's at a funeral this morning. So we've been very fortunate in the House, I think, to have some good, very bipartisan type approach to our tax reform and our tax cuts. The Speaker Ralston, has embraced tax cuts for a number of years for our citizens, And you ask why, is that helpful in rural development? And I think it's relatively obvious, but just to state that we are trying to make sure that we're competitive in a very competitive region. So I'm going to go through some of these and talk a little bit about it, but in the spirit that was just mentioned before, Brian Groom has spent an awful lot of time helping with this, and he certainly deserves a lot of credit, and not only putting these slides and these numbers together, but also for the work that we've done going back a number of years. So starting in 2018, you see that we passed House Bill 918 that would increase, actually double the standard deduction, and see what it did for our married filers. And it would reduce the income tax from 6.0 to 5.75. That's on personal income and corporate. And then in 2019, it was scheduled to go down to 5.5, the top bracket. As you know, we did not get to that point. There were some financial uncertainty regarding COVID, and we never made it to the 5.5. So in 2019, during COVID, we did feel like that hardworking Georgians needed some additional relief. So as you'll see, we bumped that standard deduction up a little bit further for single and married, and that starts in 2022. So I'm going to move on a little bit further to this year's Tax Reform and Reduction Act. Got that backwards, didn't I? Tax Reduction and Reform Act of 2022. So a lot of moving parts, but again, Speaker Ralston charged us with trying to make sure that we helped at all income levels, particularly lower income levels. So we captured some of the discussion points that we had covered in the last few years. So we went from the 5.5 to 5.49 initially. With regards to the top rate, we collapsed all those rates down, and it reduces all the way to 4.99, and you'll see a comparison here in just a minute. It does that if it meets the following three criteria. I'm not going to go through all those, but you can see that it is very fiscally responsible, and it's only if we have the enough revenue to be able to do that. We brought together the personal exemption and the standard deduction, replaced that with one sort of standard exemption, if you will. We'll illustrate that on the next page, but that goes up to 12 and 18.5, but the 18.5 graduates up to 24. So you end up with a 12 and a 24 all the way up when it's fully phased in. And then the last bullet here talks about how we allowed earned income for retirees to go from $4,000 to $5,000. So we upped that $1,000. This illustrates what it looks like year to year. So if you see where we start at 6 in 2018, we dropped to 5.75, and then in the later years we hit 5.49, and then if we with the asterisks there, we get all the way down to 4.99 in 2030. The standard exemption rotates up to 24,000. Well, it starts at 12 and 18.5, and then rotates at the married all the way up to 24 by 2030, and that's automatic. Any questions at this point? Easier to talk to questions in these slides sometimes. So here's what it looks like. If you make $50,000 for a single, or if you're married and you make $100,000, I will say with we've run numbers at all income levels, and if you look at, say, for instance, my wife, when she had as a single mother, she would have saved over $600 a year. I won't tell you what she made, but she's a speech therapist. She did okay, but I mean, it helps at just about at the lower income level at a much higher percentage than when it moves on up. But you can see what we've got here is a percentage change at the single, head of household, and married as you progress from 2018 all the way down to 2030. You see that's over $1,300 for married. And so when it's fully phased in, you won't pay one penny of income tax as a family of four on your first $30,000 of income. And as far as our region is concerned, this is what we're looking at. And we're competing for workforce right now. That's the proverbial question in a lot of places where we go is obviously the economy, but what are we going to do about workforce? And when you've got Tennessee and Florida both at 0 and Alabama's at 5, South Carolina, you see they're moving down, and then North Carolina is potentially down at 399. So in order for us to remain competitive in this region, our income tax, moving it down to 499 and potentially looking at ways to further that is going to only help us in that vein. So just to summarize, again, I think that we have seen a great deal of emphasis on allowing hardworking Georgians to keep more of their money. Really appreciate the fact that we've been able to put partisan politics aside in a big way, just like this Rural Development Council has, and do kind of what's right for hardworking Georgians and allow them the opportunity to keep more money at a time when they really needed it the most. And that is true not only of this, but also of the refunds that we passed earlier this year, and then the suspension of the gas tax as well. Be happy to answer any questions. Usually, I put people to sleep after lunch. Y'all usually wait for after lunch when we talk about taxes.
Man, yeah, I love Vice Chair Corbett.
Thank you, Chairman Blackman. How does Georgia rank compared to the other states? I know Florida has 0 income tax, but you add all the other taxes and stuff in with fees and property taxes. How does Georgia rank?
We're consistently in the bottom 5 as far as the burden on the taxpayer. So we rank really, really well overall already. But once again, I think with other states around us making those adjustments, that we're right in line with what we need to be doing to compete for workforce in our region.
Anybody else? Is that it? Well, Chairman Blackman, you must have done a phenomenal job. Nobody wants to talk about lowering taxes this
I got
morning,
everybody.
and it's an election year.
We got everybody asleep this morning, don't we?
Hey, goodness, no, thank you for what y'all are doing, and definitely need to thank our speaker and his leadership on this as we continue to head down this road, and your committee, and thank you for what you're doing. Inflation is hurting everyone, and the things that we have going on definitely helps with that. So thank you for what you do.
Thank you both. Thank you for allowing me to be here with you this morning.
All right, thank you. So
on next, we had a rural transit update, and we know it's very important, especially down here, but Abby was sitting over there just a minute ago, but she has had to leave. And so we just made her promise that she was going out to catch us up at the next meeting, either in person or by email, and one of those great infographics that House Budget and Research puts out. But just sorry to let you know that. And if there's any individual questions, we certainly have the Transportation Appropriations Chairman and myself here. You can catch us later on that.
all right, thank you, Chairman. Next up, we're going to kind of go into the meat of this meeting, in which we wanted to really touch on solar. Our state has had tremendous growth in the area of solar, and that's kind of what we're going to go into next. And I don't know where EPD is, but I think they're going to start off the lead. Okay, James, if you want to come on down and be working your way, and as I said, we've had tremendous growth in this area, especially in the last 2 years. And we've seen a lot of timberland, we've seen a lot of ag land get turned into this. We've seen a huge push for green energy, but as a state, we really don't have any guidance. We've got a lot of local governments, and they're kind of providing the regulations there, and there's no set state plan. It's just kind of everybody's doing what they want to do, and the locals are managing that, but it's some are doing this, some are doing that, and so we just wanted to kind of to look into this. This is something that Chairman Jay Powell started to look into many years ago. Mitchell County, his home county, has got a large amount of solar, so he saw this happening in his area, and so I know it was dear to his heart that was something that we look at going forward. So we wanted to kind of circle back, being that we've had so much growth. So that's what the next few speakers down the line are going to be mainly on solar, and we'll turn it over to James with EPD to kind of start talking about the environmental issues, or none thereof, whatever there may be. So turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks for having me today. Can everybody hear me? Again, my name's James Cooley. I'm the Director of District Operations for the Environmental Protection Division. And with me today is Lisa Myler. She is our District Manager down here in the Southwest District office located in Albany. So I know we've spoken this morning to a few representatives in the room, senators that have dealt with Lisa on some issues. So usually Lisa's going to be your point of contact on issues down here, especially when it comes to solar farms for issues that come up in the future. So a couple of things. I want to try to keep this brief today. I know we've got a lot to cover, but a few things that I want to talk about for solar projects are the concept versus the reality of these solar projects, green energy in general, you know, the buzz around these things, the regulations and permitting process, and then challenges with solar panel installation that we've seen from EPD's perspective. Again, today I'm not trying to pick on anybody. This is just, you know, we were asked to try to, you know, give a presentation for some of the challenges that we've seen, so that's all this is for today. So concept versus reality. So everybody sees this. This is what you see on the news. You've got this beautiful green field with these solar panels. You know, this is what you envision, you know, when you hear clean energy. You know, and then you've got something like, you know, Will Harris sending his flock of sheep out there to go, instead of sending lawnmowers out there, you have this symbiotic relationship that the farmers have with these things, where they send their flock of sheep out there to keep the grass mowed. And, you know, this is what happens ultimately. But this is kind of what, when we go to these sites, this is what we see a lot of times. So a lot of people, you don't see this side of it. And these things, especially when they're under construction, can have some pretty significant impacts to the local environment. Regulations in the permitting process, I want to keep this at a real high level, and we'll be here if you have any questions afterwards. We've got a little bit of time, but if there's additional questions, I'm glad to take the time one-on-one to answer them. So Georgia regulates construction activities with 3 MPDS permits delegated to EPA under the Clean Water Act. So these permits are reissued every 5 years following a stakeholder process, public notice, and EPA approval. And the way people get coverage under these permits is essentially they just file a notice of intent. It's not like some of the other permits we have where there's a rigorous process where you have to send in this long application and we send stuff back to you and say, well, we need X, Y, and Z, send it back. It's a pretty straightforward process. And we administer these permits under the Georgia Water Quality Act. So in addition to administering these permits, we also delegate regulatory authority to local governments under the Erosion Sedimentation Act. So basically what we do is we allow local issuing authorities, or these local governments, to adopt a model ordinance which is as stringent as these permits that we oversee, and we basically delegate authority to the local governments to oversee these permits. In addition to that, one other requirement that we have statewide before people undergo these projects, given that if they're going to do 50 acres or larger at one time, is they have to submit. If they're going to construct 50 acres or larger at one time, they have to submit a request to and require written permission from EPD prior to submitting their NOI. So we evaluate this request based on the applicant's prior enforcement history, the scope of the project, the proximity to state waters, the proximity to sensitive areas like trout streams, drinking water intakes, marshes, and if the permit falls under an impaired stream requirements of the permit, as well as the topography and soil erodibility. So basically 14 days, at least 14 days prior to commencing construction activities of any construction activity of 1 acre or greater, they have to submit this notice of intent. They're required to pay an $80 per disturbed acre fee associated with these permits. These permits are designed to be self-implementing or self-regulating. And I think a lot of people are confused by that when they call us, and they, because of the other permits that we have that we issue. These require the site to have an erosion, sedimentation, and pollution control plan done by a certified design professional. They're required to do daily, weekly, and monthly inspections for the site. They're required to document and make repairs of deficiencies / violations. They're required also to do stormwater sampling events, and then they're also required to self-report violations and corrective actions they've taken to address the violations, and that's kind of what I mean by self-monitoring, self-regulating permit. One of the things I have here is a question for you posed, and it's kind of a rhetorical question, but do you know that erosion sedimentation is the #1 source of pollution in Georgia? Is everybody aware of that? So it impacts a wide variety of aquatic ecosystems, such as tributaries, streams, rivers, lakes, and estuaries. It also impacts recreational opportunities, such as boating and fishing, and I'll give you some examples of that here a little bit further on. But it also impacts our drinking water supply. So an example of this is drinking water treatment facilities have a lot harder time treating turbid water than they do cleaner water. It also this water, ultimately, this turbid water goes and settles in our drinking water reservoirs and ultimately decreases the storage capacity in our drinking water reservoirs. It also impacts the depth of water in our ports, which I know is, very important to the state of Georgia and the economy. Just in general, I listed a few challenges here that we see with solar panel installation. The biggest one are the size of these construction sites. Has everybody been down I-16 and seen the mega site in Bryan County where they're putting in the Hyundai facility right now? Just to give you an idea, if you have seen that, a lot of these facilities are twice that size. So the magnitude of these things are great. The varying soil types in Georgia. Georgia has a very diverse range in soil types throughout the state, and I'll get to that a little more in a minute. The susceptibility to weather events because of their increased size and the increased storm intensity that we're starting to see just as these weather patterns are changing throughout the state also affect these sites. The lack of knowledge with the rules and regulations from the regulated community, lack of proper design, installation, and maintenance of best management practices, lack of consistency with regulation, inaccessibility to maintenance once solar panels are installed, impacts to local ecosystems, and litigation. Again, I've got a couple of examples of these. This is just an example. This is a solar site. You can see that the tractors look like little toy tractors out there just based on the size of the sheer magnitude of this site. So ultimately, there's about 6 different soil areas in the state, and each province or soil province in each one of these provinces offers its own set of challenges, just like I mentioned earlier, when it comes to stabilizing construction sites. And I've got a map here. I got this from UGA, and this is basically the soil provinces throughout the state. Most of the solar projects that we see, if you look at the Sandy Hills, that's essentially the fall line in the state. Most of those are going to be south of the fall line, and that's basically because of the amount of sunlight that's necessary to make these solar farms profitable. If you get too far north, they don't get enough sunlight throughout the day, and they don't produce enough energy to become profitable. So essentially, south of the fall line is where we see these projects, but in general, the Sandy Hills area where we see these areas, we run into a lot of problems because they're really hard to stabilize. If anybody's been around Taylor County and just seen how sandy it is there, we just see a lot of issues in some of those areas. So lack of design of installation and maintenance of best management practices. Again, I just want to reiterate, anytime that we see these issues, just due to the sheer magnitude of these sites, it just magnifies the environmental effects that we see. This is an example of what I was talking about earlier. If you notice all the reels that are forming in the middle of these solar panels, all the wires that are in the way now. So when we have issues coming from sites like this, they really can't go back in there with heavy equipment and fix this erosion problem. And if you look, I mean, you can see as far as the eye can see, there's reels out here. These sites are not stabilized, and this will continue to get worse. So in this particular case, we're actually talking to them about potentially having to pull a lot of these solar panels out to do some repair work, which is, not beneficial, especially when it comes to, the economics of it. This is just another look at the site, but you can see even up under the fence, I mean, everything's washing away on the site, and ultimately, in this case, ending up in the Broad River. So currently we have about 20,000 active construction sites across the state, and EPD has about 12 inspectors to ensure compliance with these sites. There's also currently 316 local issuing authorities, which I mentioned earlier. This is where we delegate the authority through allowing them to adopt a model ordinance to inspect these sites. However, in most of the cases where there is a local issuing authority, they're in the metro area and not in these rural areas. But in the cases where they are installed in these rural areas where there is an LIA, they're usually used to inspecting sites like maybe a Dollar General coming into town or something like that. They're not used to seeing sites of this magnitude. So we usually end up providing assistance to the local issuing authorities for sites of this size. So we also lack the resources to be proactive on these sites. And due to our limited staff, we usually have to be, they're prioritized on a complaint basis, and that means we usually show up after the fact, after the problems have already occurred. So we're not ahead of it, we're behind. And once a site of this magnitude, they get out of compliance, it can take them months to get back into compliance, and remediation efforts can often take longer than that. And again, I've just put a few pictures in here for you all to see. This is a site, like I was talking about earlier, over in Taylor County. I think they tried 4 or 5 times to stabilize these slopes and ended up having to just go in and rock the whole thing, because you can see here all the sediment that was leaving this site. This is in the woods below there. This is after they've remediated about 2 foot of sediment impact. This area at the bottom of the screen down here was a creek or a stream at one time. They essentially had to go back and just dig it back out and make a new one to remediate it. This area was a wetland on that same site, but it was completely filled in, completely gone. This is a site in another part of the state where lack of maintenance, design, installation, and maintenance of best management practices caused significant sediment release from the site. This is further downstream. This is the Broad River in Elbert County that ultimately goes down to Clark Hill Lake. And this kind of gets back to what I was talking about earlier. So this sediment is going to deposit in Clark Hill Lake right below somebody's dock, where they could pull their boat in last year, but this year they can't park their boat at their dock anymore because of all this sediment deposition. So that's just another way that, not only does it impact the ecosystem, but it also affects recreational opportunities in some of our larger reservoirs. This is another area where you can see significant impact from a solar farm. If you look at the top left, that's the solar farm, so you can see the sediment coming down into this lake, and the picture on the right is ultimately what it looked like. And then this is the area in between the solar farm and the lake. This is the creek and the banks of the stream, where you just have feet of sediment deposited into the woods. The one other thing I wanted to talk about just real quickly is lawsuits. So when off-site properties are impacted from construction activities, a lot of times they don't necessarily approve the remediation efforts that we're going to have somebody do. They want something above and beyond what we've asked or what we're requiring the respondents to do. And so they file a lawsuit. When they do, that often ties up our time, not only in court testifying, but also pulling together records. And then these things can drag on for years and inhibit EPD's ability to require remediation to certain impacts of the environment. With that, I'll leave you with any questions.
If I had a light bar up here, it'd probably be lit up all the way across, but, I maybe just I guess I just need to get started with questions. Representative Williams, did you have one?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for some very interesting information. One of the things that I know has happened in the past, in the distant past, and don't want to see happen in the future, is because of economic desperation, anything looks good. You know, Riceboro, a little community in my district, I think we're going to have a day off from work because General Dollar is going to open, you know. But with these solar panels, a lot of poor people live in the area. And the impact I'm seeing, you know, it's a good selling job on the front end, but what's the eventual impact on the quality of life on the back end? And I know the folk that have boat docks and stuff ain't gonna be happy. All of a sudden you can't see a foot below the surface. Real concerns there, that when you've got regulations all over the place and a few folk can decide how everything looks, and the people who suffer are those now who have another reason to leave town. We're trying to bring people to town. So, and you mentioned the shortness in staff. I can't think of a better place to spend money than to save lives and the quality of life. So, you know, a lot of political pressure on anybody that works in anything called environmental protection. Until the water turns purple, then everybody wants to call. So talk to us what your future plans, what are going to be your recommendations to stabilize this permitting and to make sure that people who are already catching hell don't catch double hell now because of that?
Well, I guess to answer your first part about the staffing, one of the things that we've noticed is it's not necessarily the quantity, but it's also the quality. You know, we unfortunately we can't tell somebody we can't take a job because we don't have enough people. We just, you know, we have, it may take us a little bit longer to get to it, but we're going to get to it. As far as requiring them to do the remediation, even the pictures, the examples I showed you, we're going to require remediation efforts to restore those areas back to the pre-existing conditions before that solar farm got there. If they do have off-site impacts. And a lot of times it's a quick presentation. It can impact somebody's fishing pond, just a creek behind their house, all the way up to the Broad River and a lake. So the spectrum's really broad on the impacts that come from not only these sites, but other construction sites as well. And we try to do the best we can to reach out with our local partners and work together with them and have a symbiotic relationship with them to ensure that they keep this dirt on site and do not let it leave site. So our future plans are just to continue to try to educate people, work with these solar projects. And again, one of the things that I talked about earlier was some of the things that we look at when they ask to do these projects. We look at their prior history. So if they have a prior history with us, if they showed us that they're bad actors, what we may do is limit the size of disturbance. We may say, okay, you can do this project, but you can only disturb 100 acres at a time. We don't necessarily have the ability to tell them, you know, from a zoning perspective, you can't put something here. You know, we just have to make sure that they put it there in accordance with our rules and regulations. So does that answer your question?
Chairman, for full disclosure, I just want you to know I do sit on the board of a rapidly growing solar company, so it's not a vendetta. I just want to make sure people can live 50 years from now.
Chairman England, did you have a question?
On those sites where in between the panels, you're having the erosion issues, is there not anything that can be done on the front end to stabilize? Because you know that those panels are going to shed water to one side or the other. If they're a tracking panel, they're going to shed water to both sides in a heavy rain event. All of us have sheds and farm buildings around our places and don't have gutters on them. We know what happens. You wind up getting that runoff on that drip line. Is there not something that we can do proactively on the front end as these projects are being designed? Do we need to go in and add something into the Green Book, the Erosion Sediment Control Green Book, stating that on these type of installations that there will be some type of special matting installed in that location where that drip line is going to be? I mean, isn't there something we can do on the front end instead of y'all always having to chase everything on the back end on that one issue in particular? Now, you know, the runoff of 1,000 acres, there's not a whole lot we can do, but we can start taking it in small bites, and that would be one thing. What would we need to do? What would need to be done to kind of get on the front end of that?
Well, I think it's something really good to look into. That's a really good idea. But I think the biggest thing that we can do up front is just stabilize these things before, you know, potentially even before you put the solar panels in would be one option. Again, I'm not an engineer, so I don't know the exact answer to your question as far as what exactly we could do. But I think we could propose that some additional BMPs be looked at, or an alternative BMP be looked at, that we could eventually adopt into the Green Book to address some of this issue. I guess you could call it guttering or runoff from roof-type runoff. It's a really good observation.
So I guess, in which way do we need to go about attempting that? Do we need to go through a Soil and Water Conservation Commission as something for them to look at? Or is it something that y'all could bring from EPD as a recommendation? Which pathway do you think would be what needs to be done there?
I think the easiest thing would be to do is actually one of the project that I just showed you. I'm actually working with Ben Ruswitz on that project right now. So maybe that's something I could just bring up with Ben tomorrow and talk to him and just let him know that you brought that up. And we'll see if that's something that we can bring to the council to talk about in the next meeting.
Representative Bentley, do you have a question?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Cooley, for your presentation. And I actually live in Taylor County, right down the street from where those panels are located. Has there been any discussions with the local governments about these concerns? And if so, what has been the response from the locals?
So as far as environmental concerns?
Or the issue with the erosion between the panels?
Yeah, so again, where we have local issuing authorities, where, you know, we have a delegated authority and they have their own development program or their engineering program, whatever they call it, we usually work together with these folks. And if they have a problem, if they want our assistance up front, you know, if they say, look, this project's too big for me to inspect, I'm gonna need your help out here, we're glad to assist them with those. But just in general of their opinion of, I guess your question is whether they should be there or not? Is that a question, or is it just
or more so, what is being done to address the erosion issue in Taylor County with those panels? Are you working with the local governments there to address that issue? Because if not, I see that this is going to get worse than what it is now.
Yes, so that's, like, for example, this was one of that site I was showing you. They initially they were just matting and grass this slope. So they just literally were putting this straw mat down, and then they were putting grass seed. And that slope, I think, actually went 3 times. We made them dig that creek back out and pull all that sediment back out 3 times. And this was ultimately what they did on this site, is they just rock armored the whole thing because we stayed on them until they got the site stabilized.
Okay.
That's kind of an example, but you know, if there is a site where something like that's not being addressed and the locals have not brought that to our attention, we'd be glad to look into it if you have a specific, you know, example.
Okay, well, we'll talk more after this meeting. Thank you.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Chairman Perkle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regarding your permitting process, and it's a 5-year permit, as I recognize, in my former life as a banker, if I were funding a project that had a 20-year payback and I could only get a 5-year permit, that would be problematic. Are you seeing problems associated? My understanding is some of these solar projects are a 20, 25-year payback. If there's only a 5-year permit, are we limiting the ability to look forward in paying this loan back, or the payback in the project cost?
Yeah, and I apologize this is a lot of information for a short amount of time. These permits, these NPDES permits, they're water discharge permits, and this particular permit is just the water discharge associated with the construction activity. So once they've stabilized the site and filed a notice of termination, they're no longer covered or no longer need coverage under that permit.
Thank you for that. I do have concerns about taking valuable farmland as we're trying to feed and clothe the world, taking some valuable ag timberlands out of production for this purpose. And I recognize the problems that some of these sites will have. You mentioned the 6 different soil types. I've got those across one field in a cotton field. It's sand to clay to tift, and I can imagine the problems associated with trying to make a mega site out of the differing contours of the land. Vice Chair Corbett.
Thank you, Mr. Coley. You painted quite a different picture than we normally show when it comes to solar. I mean, we're normally showing, wildflowers and butterflies and bumblebees. So this quite eye-opening, to say the least. Has anybody done a true in-depth study, comparing the economic environmental impact of, say, an acre of solar as compared if that land had been left in farming or forestry? Has anybody done that to look at the true impact over the life of the solar panel?
Not that I'm aware of.
I think it'd be interesting to know. And the other question I've got, these runoffs and stuff, you see silt fence collapsed and all that, were there fines issued in those cases?
In some of the situations, it just depends. Part of that permit, when I was talking earlier about it being a self-regulating permit, as long as they have everything designed, installed, and maintained appropriately, if they have an incident like this that happens, as long as they take appropriate measures to remediate any impacts associated with it and make the adjustments to their plan, then basically they're protected under the permit.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Chairman Jeffers, do you have a question?
Yeah. Hey, thank you. I guess I want to follow up with Chairman England's question. So on a site like the one you're describing there, they had to do a soil and water, plan, erosion plan. It's over an acre. Was this a county issue, or they had their own own regulatory group working on it, and then they were overwhelmed, and then this is caused, or it just seems like it's a failure of the soil and of the plan.
Yeah, well,
more than anything.
We see a lot of different scenarios. Again, going back to this one, it wasn't necessarily the plan on this one. It was just like we were talking about earlier. The site is so sandy here, and it's so hard to get grass to grow that the slopes just wasn't stabilized. But in some of the other pictures I'm showing you, some of those, like for example, let's see, which go, like this situation here, they didn't put in a sediment pond that they were supposed to, which should have been addressed on their plans, but the locals didn't catch it when we came out there. Now we're working with the locals to try to help them get the site back in compliance. It goes back to what I was talking about earlier. Sometimes when you have a site like this that comes into an area where they're not used to seeing a site like this, they're just used to seeing a Dollar General or a General House or something that's an acre to not something that's 500 or 1,000 acres. That requires a lot more attention to detail when it comes to the erosion and sedimentation pollution control plan, because these sediment ponds are very important for sites like this, because that's your last defense before the creek.
So, that county is not taking, I guess the responsibility is the harsh word, of getting an engineer to review the plan that's presented to them when they're approving the site.
In some incidences. Like I said, we see them all over the board. As the ball gets dropped somewhere in the process, sometimes somebody just misses something. And then sometimes there's changes made on the site that weren't necessarily in the original plans, but, you know, somebody called an audible halfway through the project because of, for whatever reason, and they didn't tell anybody. And then the inspector goes out there and it's like, well, what's this? Oh, well, we changed our mind. So there's just a lot of different scenarios we run into.
Thank you, Chairman.
Any other questions? All right, well, I'll just kind of close it out, and thank you for this information. And I know just from a farmer standpoint, if I were to do anything like this on my farm, I would have some kind of federal, state regulator there in a heartbeat, jumping on my back and fining me, and so big time, yeah. So it is great concern, and Corbett's question about the environmental impact, you know, an acre of farming versus an acre of solar. I know there's a lot of solar people in the room today, but maybe somebody has some of that they could maybe address that comment, because this is very troubling on some of these mega sites, that stuff we don't know about, that you guys do, and obviously I noticed throughout your slides the word lack was in a lot of them. And that makes it even more concerning for me as an environmentalist myself, who tends to do everything I can to take care of my land, because that's how I make my living as well. So, but anyway, thank you for being here.
One other thing, just saying, you know, I remember last or 2 years ago we were talking about this issue, you know, a high level, I guess, sit in a room. What about end of service? You know, we've had, as Chairman Corbett and others talked about, I've got 500 acres that's Class A, you know, one farmland. 26 years from now, end of service. Is there any plans at EPD to ensure removal of panels? Because I know they've got different heavy metals in them or whatever their construction is. Do we have anything that addresses that?
No, sir. We haven't looked into anything like that. Again, as far as our permitting goes, as far as we regulate these things, it kind of ends with this construction permit. So once the site's built, it falls out from under our regulatory purview.
Thank you.
Thank you, James. Appreciate that information, and thank you for being here. Next up, we've got David Gotti with the University of Georgia. David, if you can start coming on down. Know you've got a lot to talk about solar, and might be able to touch on some of this, and so appreciate you being here today, and as soon as Leo gets you set up there, you go right ahead and get started.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman Watson. And just a little correction, it's Gaddy. Just don't get me mixed up with the Crime Boss family, because it has happened in the past. I really don't need that shadow hanging over me.
I don't blame you. I would too.
It's good to be back. Actually, I spent the middle part of the 80s, we lived, my wife and I did, in Americus. I worked right over here at Sumter EMC. I don't know about it if it's growing down here, but the roads have changed a lot. When I came in, I didn't know where I was. I haven't been back here in about 30 years. I appreciate the council having me here today. I'm going to take a completely different view of this than what Mr. Cooley just did. I'm going to switch gears and move upstream. We're going to talk about this in the power sector part of it. So I'm going to give an overview, general overview of solar in Georgia, mainly focused on reliability and what the impacts of this could be on our power sector. Overview of the power sector, but for the most part, put it in context of our resources, and also give you a few examples of what's going on in the rest of the country. So this is where we are right now in our power sector, and you can see the trends. This goes back to 1990. And again, I'm going to be coming at this from ensuring that our power sector is reliable and affordable, and that the grid is sound. You can see what's going on. Most of you, I'm sure, are aware that our coal resource is trending down. We've got a couple of plants left, one up in Cartersville, one in down in Juliet, down at Shearer. That's a concern when it comes to losing a baseload resource like what we've had in Georgia for all these years. We're backfilling that mostly with natural gas. You can see barely, and I'll expand on this in just a little bit, solar's got a little bit of an uptick there, but right now solar's about 3.8% of our electric power sector. Again, keep in mind as we go through this, when we're talking about reliability, we've got a baseload resource like coal that we're for the most part backfilling with a flow resource like natural gas, what the impacts of solar could be. This is our capacity right now in the state. Big numbers, we're at about 19,000 megawatts in natural gas, coal's at about 9,000. We've got 2 nuclear plants, of course, about 4,200 megawatts there. We got the 2 units at Vogtle coming online probably next year. Looking at the solar PV there, and I'm going to get into this, those may look comparable, but I'm going to talk about something in just a minute that'll put it in a little bit better perspective as far as the reliability goes. And then our hydro is fixed. Our biomass is pretty solid. It's probably, as far as generation goes, is a major contributor to the power sector. But really, that's not where we're making a lot of hay right now. This is the growth that y'all have talked about today. This, Chairman Watson, you mentioned. And just notice here from 15 to 16 where that upticked, and then again from 18 to 19, it upticked. Pretty flat there in 16, 17, and 18, but we are seeing a lot, and this is all utility scale. There's no rooftop solar in any of the numbers that I'm giving, but we're seeing an increase here. I'm going to put it in some perspective here in just a minute with regard to other states, but it is, essentially, it's our only renewable resource that we've got here in the state of Georgia. Wind's not there. Biomass, I don't really count it in there as like I do solar, because it's the one that's growing. The reason for that, and I'm going to give 2 reasons here. These are costs per kilowatt hour for solar panels since back to 2010, and you can see the price has gone down from $753 in 2010 to $271. That's a good bit of a decrease if that's residential and solar, but if you look at utility scale, the same trend. Keep in mind the IRA that was just passed in August is going to incentivize this even further. It's a 30% tax credit, so we're going to see even more incentives in addition to the already decrease in costs for solar there. So this is the slide that I want to take just a minute to try to get a few points across here. These are critical slides in the power sector when it comes to choosing resources that we're going to prop the grid up with. This is a capacity factor. In this case, it's utility solar, and I'm going to give you 2 others in a minute for natural gas and nuclear just to put it in perspective, but let me take a minute and explain what this graph is. The overall bar, the yellow and the gray, as you move from January to December, this is for the year 2021, that's the capacity that we have in utility scale solar. So for the U.S., it went from January at about 47,000 megawatts to December to about 53,000 megawatts. So about 6,000 megawatts were added. The yellow part is how much work you're getting out of those solar panels. So in the month of January, that total 43,000 megawatts of solar, we were getting about 16.2% return out of that. That is, it was generating electricity 16.2% of the time. That's mainly because you have, it's nighttime, the solar panels don't work, weather impacts that, and you can see here it peaks in June. Part of what we think about, and at least when we do research on this up at Georgia, is just what is that where we want to invest long-term when it comes to reliability in the state. For the year, for 2021, in the U.S., all utility scale solar, the capacity factor was 24.6%. So we refer to that gray area for the most part as a stranded asset. That is, you ain't getting nothing out of it. The yellow part is when you're getting revenue streams moving in your direction. Now put that in context or compare with, this is the direction that the power sector is moving, not just in Georgia, but also throughout the country. The capacity factor for natural gas combined cycle, close to 55%. This is going to continue to increase throughout the country as we divest from coal plants and tack into natural gas. You go back 25% up to 54%. The reliability there is pretty evident, it's pretty obvious. Not to mention, this is a dispatchable, callable resource here. This is not disparaging solar. The point is just, this is what you get out of a natural gas combined cycle plant. If we look at nuclear capacity factor for it, it's 92. Yes, sir. You want me to go back?
Yeah, please. On the stranded, on the natural gas, is that just downtime for repair? Or
Downtime, maintenance, and repair. And right now, we've got plants coming online, so we have plants that aren't fully operational right now. So we'll dial these back from time to time if we have a cheaper dispatch resource there. So this is going to increase over time as we dial the coal down. We're actually going to, a lot of states are running natural gas combined cycle as baseload plants.
Thank you.
Other countries, in other states. Representative Jaspers, did I answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
thank you.
So operation and maintenance, and you'll see they drop down a little bit in the springtime in particular.
Okay.
This is nuclear. It just sits there and runs. You'll see it also drops down in April and October. That's generally where we're going to refuel those things throughout the country. Again, that puts it in context. I'm bringing this up because in Georgia, we're doing solar very differently than we are in several states. And this is where solar is currently in the U.S. For whatever reasons, for one thing, solar is not the #1 renewable in the country. It's wind by far. But solar gets a lot of the headlines. This is where solar is actually right now most dominant. 77% of the solar generation in the country is from those 8 states right there. Now, if you look at the first 2, and I'll look at those here in just a second in a little more detail, it's California, which right now generates 28% of the country's solar electricity. Texas is sitting there at about maybe 12 or 13%. Notice Georgia, and I've got the stars over there on the right-hand side, located where the states are that are here, those 8 states, but also notice the states over in the southwest part of the country where there's a lot of solar resource availability. And then you've got 3 states over on the east side, North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, that are among those 8 states. It's the difference between where the solar resource is located versus like here in Georgia, where it's a policy directive for the most part that is driven by, I'll talk about it in a minute, by just pragmatic, calculated policy, not, as we'll see here with the 2 states that I want to highlight here, California and Texas. Both states have been in the news for bad reasons. This is Texas's generation profile, their power sector. And what I want you to note here is as their coal has declined, they are backfilling a little bit there with natural gas, but what they are really backfilling there with is with wind. So they're backfilling with an intermittent resource. We are backfilling for the most part with natural gas, but also bringing online nuclear. Very different than what they're doing there in Texas. Texas, right now, a deregulated market, really has nobody that's in charge of reliability to ensure that the grid has sufficient reserve margins to carry them through bad weather events. Texas, from my conversations with folks out there are still shoes yet to drop out there when it comes to their grid. Also, one thing to note, Texas's residential rate there of 12.8, and I think I did not mention Georgia's. I should have. Yep, Georgia's residential rate back here, I meant to mention 12.6 cents per kilowatt hour. The U.S. average is 13.72 cents, so that puts it a little bit more in context. So let me jump back real quick, and I apologize for the reversal. Let's look at California for just a second. California and Texas are 2 models for Georgia, essentially, for what not to do. Texas's grid, for the most part, is chasing the cheapest resource at the margins. It is looking for 1 or 2 years out, whatever's cheapest, whatever's lowest cost, And right now, that is oftentimes subsidized renewables or very inexpensive natural gas. If we look at California, they're looking at it just bass backwards of almost every other state in the country. That they are organizing their grid to meet carbon reduction efforts. You can see what you get here. They have shut down their coal plants. They actually have shut down nuclear plants. They've got some natural gas plants, but their state policies are still directing them towards a zero carbon power sector by, I think the years are 2035 or 2040. But what's not in their state policy plans is how do you organize around reliability. So Texas is chasing lowest marginal cost. California is chasing carbon reduction. But if you look at California's rates here of 22.85 cents a kilowatt hour, it's always the highest in the country, just about all the time. But they have low carbon emissions. In fact, if we look at the top 8 GDPs in the country, and we look at them in two ways, here this is our residential rates. Top 8 GDPs, Georgia coming in at number 8. Our residential rates over all these years with this calculated integration of utility scale solar, we've still been able to keep those rates down below the national average, which is that black dotted line. In states like California and New York that are organizing their grids around low carbon and higher penetrations of renewables, you can see what they get on that return. If we look at a lot of this, particularly things like the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed in August, very focused on carbon reduction, very focused on climate change. And Georgia really has a lot to brag about in this space. This is a little bit busy graph, but what it indicates here is CO2 intensity from the power sector per dollar GDP. And what we see is since 1997, those same top 8 GDPs in the country, you see the national average there, it's the black dotted line, and Georgia is the red dotted line. Our CO2 emissions per dollar GDP has been in decline since 1997. And again, a lot of the reason for that is the way the market is structured here, vertically integrated, regulated market, we've been able to make calculated policy decisions by bringing things in like solar, very calculated, instead of doing things like California's doing, bringing in too much at one time, and you end up jeopardizing the grid just as Texas has done as well. So we're doing well both on here, the residential rate part, and also the CO2 emission per GDP part. Here's what oftentimes, though, is not brought into this conversation. I think that everybody sitting here today that's coming from the State House is well aware of the supply chain issues that we're dealing with on the rare earths, metals, and minerals front. One of the concerns that I have as we move into the renewable space and we promote more and more and more renewables, we have got to keep in mind that if we're going to do that for the sake of displacing a reliable resource like coal or natural gas, we're transferring that dependency instead of something like coal and gas over to rare earths, metals, and minerals. And when you look at who's dominating that supply chain globally, it clearly is not the U.S. It's China. They have dominated the upstream, midstream, and downstream market in solar PV for 15 or 20 years. And this is something that they have been planning on doing for decades, and we haven't. So as we consider and think about moving into more and more solar, we're going to have to take this into account as where we're going to outsource, how we're going to build those things, and essentially who's going to hold the purse strings and the supply chains on where we source those materials. These are our power sector trends. This is where we're building capacity. For the most part, I'm just comparing these 4: natural gas, coal, nuclear, and solar. And the reason here being just to draw attention to, again, what we're doing in Georgia. As coal goes down, natural gas increases, solar is coming up in a very conservative way. And once, again, those two blue lines there at 2022 and 2023, once Vogel Units 3 and 4 come online, they're going to be, perhaps allow us to do a little bit more in the solar space, but it's certainly going to backfill that coal so that we can maintain the reliability that we're accustomed to. So I'm going to close out with just a few points. The way that Georgia has done solar, if you look around the rest of the country, it's actually very impressive. The Public Service Commission, Georgia Power, Oglethorpe Power, the EMCs, and MEAGs have been able to do this at the utility scale without putting upward pressure on prices, even as baseload coal declines. Of course, we do have that baseload nuclear coming online too. But what this speaks to, compared with states like Texas and California, both of which are deregulated states, we've been able to keep that solar growth aligned with our overarching objective of ensuring that the system is reliable and that our rates are affordable. To the council, really what Georgia's doing with solar, I think, is probably a model for the country, as we're not going into this solely for the sake of trying to reduce carbon and address climate change. We're going into this as economic development opportunities and also to ensure that the grid remains reliable and we keep rates as low as we can. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you've got. I think that's my last slide. Yeah, because it won't go any further there.
Thank you, David. My question, one of the first slides you had was the cost.
The rates?
No, the growth in solar was because of the decreased cost.
Yep.
And it just, I don't know of anything in cost that has gone down. I mean, everything I'm buying today, from groceries to parts for equipment, has gone up.
Right.
Why is the cost to produce solar panels and gone down? And then supply chain you mentioned at the end. I mean, that's all we hear about is the supply chain problems. That's why we can't get a lot of the things. So that just intrigues me.
There's been a lot of incentives for this. There's been a lot of incentives put into getting solar panels down the cost curve on this cost. I mean, that was the incentive. In fact, a lot of the net metering policies that were put in place over the past few years have been for that reason, to try to increase demand for solar panels and for that reason to try and come down the cost curve. So we're still in the early stages. When those incentives drop out, the question then is going to be, what are the prices? Particularly as more and more people move into it and the demand increases.
But if
what are the prices going to do then?
If China's in control of that, are they the ones getting that incentive to?
Well, they building them very, very cheaply over there right now because they don't deal with the same labor costs that we deal, the same environmental costs that we do. Everything that they're doing over there is much, much cheaper, but maybe to the point you're raising, they do still one day may decide, you know what, maybe the price has been low enough, long enough. The point here is there's kind of a two-edged sword to this thing. Costs are going down, demand goes up, dependency increases on solar. We've got grid issues that we are having to take care of, but at the same time, we're shifting our reliability and dependencies on things we don't have any control over right now. And it's minerals, metals, global supply chain.
Sounds like farming. Let me get some questions here. Representative Yerta.
Thank you. Appreciate you being here today. And
yes.
I just want to say that Georgia needs to be proud for putting in the 2 nuclear units. They've certainly not been without issues, but they're going to be coming online in next year, hopefully. But anyway, that's going to provide good base load power for up to 80 years, and non-emitting particularly. But my question, with the Inflation Reduction Act passed in August, there were a number of production tax credits associated with that. Do you feel like that will make a difference in solar installation in Georgia and all over the country?
It's going to make a difference. It's going to increase the amount of solar installations across the country. That's not me saying that in the sense of I think that's a good thing. I'm just saying that when you incentivize something to the level of 30%, You're going to have plenty of people buying into that. Personally, I think there are concerns that we need to take to heart that a 30% tax credit investment for the next 10 years, we're going to run our grid for another 80 or 90 or 100 years. And as EVs come online, which they're going to come online, they will, we want to make sure, to your point, that we've got things like nuclear base load so that we can bring in things like solar still in a very conservative way that keeps downward pressure on prices and that we not sacrifice reliability. I think we're going to see some severe reliability issues in the country as we chase carbon reduction policies instead of economic development policies wrapped in reliability. Georgia really could be the model for
diversity is the best plan, and we do that well in Georgia, I think.
Diversity? Is that what
Yeah.
Can't say it enough. Can't say it enough. Which, gets to the point. In fact, I was not a supporter of shutting down the coal plants. I was glad to see the Public Service Commission backed that away, and we kept those coal plants at Shearer and Bowen. I'm glad to see they're keeping those online. That's not the kind of thing you would normally expect to hear from a person in academia, but this is about grid reliability right now. And right now, our CO2 emissions are at 1988 levels. We want to ensure that reliability is what it's always been in Georgia.
Thank you. Chairman England?
Sir?
Chairman England has a question.
So, and I want to preface what I'm going to say very quickly, but the mixture is a good thing. It's always good to have a mixture of what you're doing, but to go so heavily reliant on one or the other is not a good thing. And case in point has been Texas over the past year, particularly this past summer, as they were having their issues out there. And you noticed on one of the slides there that David had up, there's a very large star on the state of Texas. Other way, one more. There you go. And having been out there for a few days this past summer and watching them moving tractor-trailer sized generators around from one part of the state to the other on the highway and switching units on trailers the same size as the generators to get them to the points that they could meet demand, you realize very quickly that as nice as it is to have a solar panel that doesn't give off any kind of emission, that when you have to take and back up those solar panels with those portable generators that you don't necessarily have as good of an emission control on as what you would a natural gas plant or any other fossil fuel plant that's built and stays in one place all the time, it is certainly an issue. And Sam, kind of to your point, Chairman Watson, to your point there a little bit ago on the cost, it's kind of like that big screen TV that you got on the wall that 10 years ago, 10 years ago would have been $1,500. Today you can find it on sale at Walmart for $350. It's just a matter of production and getting things rolling. But at the same time, the other issue we wind up having with solar and that low cost of entrance on the front end is because we have been somewhat negligent as a state of coming back in and saying, okay, there needs to be some costs considered in that for the future. And going back to when those panels come offline 25 or 30 years from now, just y'all remember former Chairman Powell, that was one of the things that really bothered him an awful lot is what happens when those panels go offline, when a company goes bankrupt and walks away from them, who cleans that up, how that is handled. So I think, I'm about to step away and leave y'all hanging with it, but it's certainly one of those things that I think still has to be dealt with. And I think Georgia could certainly lead the way in the country on policy as that is looked at going forward. Is it, a tenth of a cent per kilowatt hour produced by those panels that goes into an indemnity fund that helps clean that up at the end? I don't know what the number needs to be, but I think that's something that we all certainly need to be thinking about and working on going forward.
Representative Williams, do you have a question?
Good question. I was listening, and I think you kind of touched on it, but what bothers me is something that Georgia has no real control over. And I don't know whether, I'm from Midway, never did real well in math, but I got a pretty good memory. And I remember when we decided to shift all of our chip needs to Taiwan because of labor and some other things. Now solar is growing, and we're almost totally dependent upon China for the equipment for the panels. They dominate the field. Now, that's our sworn enemy, in spite of how much business we continue to do with China. So why are not American businesses looking more at producing? There are a few, but we hadn't made a significant effort to produce solar panels here, because one day we're going to be just like we were with Walmart, and I hope no employees are here, but they had these commercials with falling prices just breaking up. And after all the mom and pops got run out of business, they gathered the broken numbers and put them back together and raised their prices. And so I see us becoming prisoners again, deeper to China, because of where we have to buy our panels from.
I agree. This goes back to the decision we made back in the 90s that pretty much the end of the Cold War, we thought peace was about to break out all over the world. Globalized economies were going to be a good thing. We were going to chase the lowest cost wherever it was. We outsourced when Mountain Pass, that essentially shut down Mountain Pass out west. We decided it's cheaper to have our minerals and metals refined and the products made overseas. So it was our own decision. We're trying to backtrack it, but we're about 100 car lengths behind right now. We got a lot of ground to make up.
They ain't got chips.
Well, too, when you think about also the more penetration we have of renewables, we're going to have more battery backup storage as well. That too is a minerals, metals dependency on a global supply chain. There is a little death spiral that we need to be real careful of here.
Chairman Parker.
Thank you so much. And thank you for pointing out that here in the state of Georgia, the tail does not wag the dog, that we're looking at opportunities and economic development for our energy strategy. And to our members at the PSC, thank you. To the members of the General Assembly, thank you. But one of the slides that would cause me great concern if I lived in California is I think it showed that 30% of their...
Oh, gosh. I'm glad you brought that up.
Okay. If that was right...
That's it right there.
They import 30% of their electricity. The thing that sets us apart, and I'm so thankful for the stability of our electric supply. When you run out of electricity, you run out of business. And having to buy it elsewhere would be exceedingly expensive. And I think as we should protect our food supply, those are things that we need. And for our farmers, like Representative Watson, that provides food that we need, that's part of our security, national security, and for in-state, I think that's part of our security, that we're not reliant on other players in order to keep the lights on.
So I think you've made the summary point, Representative, that Georgia really looks at this as a security issue before it looks at it as anything else. One of the interesting points there about California importing that, 30%, so for every kilowatt hour that it imports, dollars leave the state, and you also are not generating kilowatt hours within the state. That is really it's egregious that they would actually put themselves in that position because they're losing jobs in state and they're shipping money out of state. It's their decision. It's a policy decision. It is a heavy top-down, policy-driven state. And 22.8 cents per kilowatt hour and reliability is not there.
Chairman Jasper.
Thank you, David.
Yes, sir.
Very thought-provoking. Chairman Watson and I were just talking that we didn't expect the questions and about this. But you mind I want to go back to that natural gas and just leave it on that slide right there.
Here?
Just leave it there because
Yes,
that's
sir.
the important one to me. I know it's not about solar or anything, but it seems like all states, and you can kind of enlighten us, are attempting to use natural gas over coal as a base load provider. And it seems like there's going to be, current political world is just stopping further exploration of natural gas and use of it. It seems like there's kind of be a moment that those lines are going to cross even for that, and it's going to become extremely expensive, and because a limited resource as everything is. What's your thoughts on that?
They're aligned with what you just said, and if you think about it just economically, as you reduce, and Representative said it earlier about diversity, I think Representative England, once you start reducing diversity in your portfolio and you narrow it down to a couple or three resources, naturally prices then amongst those three are going to start going up because the competition's just not there. The thing about natural gas in particular, it's a flow resource, and this is just speaking as a nerd engineer. If you've got a power plant that's generating a just-in-time product, and your generating fuel is just-in-time delivered, that's tenuous. It's great to have it, but if you look at a state like Florida, where 75% of their pipe, there's not a lot of competition for, and the reliability, if you think about a pipe coming from the Gulf of Mexico, bending all the way down to Miami, if they have a bad time in the Gulf of Mexico, Miami's going to have a bad time as well. So there's almost a perfect storm of not only reliability, but pricing, volatility of natural gas. We need the diversity there to hedge. It's an old phrase, but we still need to have the capacity to hedge. And no better example right now than Europe ever. None. Not only for electricity, but for heat. They're in trouble. I don't know if I answered your question, but it sent me off on maybe a rant in the wrong direction.
Mine was just a rabbit chasing a little bit too, but just back to you were saying, I agree absolutely with you, that coal needs to stay in our mix for that stability of power generation.
And it's a hard argument to make in the current conversation around energy and climate policy.
Yeah.
It's risky for me to say that we need to keep coal plants open. Yeah. I'm liable to get back to Athens and who knows what.
Get canceled, huh?
But it is a hard argument to make, but I've spent a lot of time out in the Midwest states where they mine coal, where they mine gas, mine oil, dig, drill. They understand reliability out there, and it's hard for us to understand it as a downstream state until we ain't got it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes,
Appreciate it.
I've got one final question real quick. On the natural gas, I've noticed it's been pretty high on lots of your charts there, but what's the access and availability of that across rural Georgia? Do we know?
I think it's more, the question would be more about whether it's for heating or whether it's for power generation, and I'd have to yield Representative Watson and just give me some time to get, I'd be happy to dive into that and get you some information on it. My guess is we could always use additional capacity.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? I think that's it, David.
Okay.
Thank you for being here today.
I appreciate
Good
y'all having me.
information.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, next up, Georgia EMC. Jeff Pruitt, Jason Bragg, come on down. I guess now we'll kind of be going into the other side of the conversation and hear from some that are in the solar business and are using solar. So thank y'all for being here and look forward to hearing from you.
Well, let's see, still morning. Good morning, and very glad to be here to speak with you today. Appreciate the opportunity, Chairman. And, so introduce myself just a little bit. I know many of you, but it's Jeff Pratt. I'm president of Green Power EMC. That's an entity that the co-ops, the electric co-ops, created in Georgia back in 2001 to look at renewable energy and see how it might fit their business, and also source that renewable energy in a very effective way. I'm also vice president of Oglethorpe Power and work in the emerging technologies area. So that's everything from electric vehicles to other usually customer-facing opportunities that may be there to help them do better. Most of you know this, but for those of you that don't, the co-ops serve about 70% of the land area in the state, 75% I think, and most of it's in rural areas of the state. We serve about almost half of the population of the state, mostly residential customers, and mostly in those rural areas, as I said. Although Metro Atlanta does have quite a bit of growth in those areas, and some of our co-ops have experienced a lot of growth from that over the last 20 years. So where are our solar facilities in the state? And let me tell you a little bit about those. Our co-ops in Georgia have entered into purchase power from solar projects, mostly, we talked a lot about economics. Dr. Gaddy did a great job of talking about those economics a little bit. We haven't done it because we're trying to be clean necessarily. Glad to be as clean as we can. We've done it because of economics. It's actually the cheapest kilowatt hour you can put on the grid today, but make no mistake, you cannot keep the lights on with solar energy. So does that mean that it does not add some value to the grid? No, it does add some value to the grid for several reasons, but in measured amounts. And so far, as Dr. Gaddy said, Georgia is kind of a model for that. The co-ops in Georgia have added this because it helps keep downward pressure on rates and pricing, and that's very helpful. I think they've done it responsibly, and I'll tell you a little bit about that the responsibility that we've taken to make sure that we do good land use and management. But the co-ops, there are over 900 co-ops in the country. These co-ops have added about 25% of the solar that those 900 co-ops have done nationally. So it's a good story. It's a good power supply option. With any power supply choice that you make, diversity is huge. Fully agree with Dr. Gaddy on that. We also, but with any power supply choice you make, there are costs, environmental costs. Some are more so than others. There's reliability concerns in any choice that you make, and diversity is the key. And fortunately, Georgia has one of the most diverse portfolios of any state in the country, largely because of Plant Vogtle and Hatch and the nuclear facilities. We do have some coal we're keeping online. I think you'll find that our co-ops will not close their part of plant share anytime soon. One of the big reasons for that is because of our concern about the reliability that Dr. Gaddy spoke about. So this gives you an idea of the growth in the state of Georgia and of solar energy. We have a lot of landfill gas to energy projects in a biomass facility. We've had those for years, but solar is by and large the largest part of what we have today. Hydro continues to be a good resource for the state as well, but there's only so many dams you can put in and only so much water in this state. I want to talk a little bit about the opportunities and benefits as well as the challenges of solar energy. So we have two major goals, affordability and reliability. And solar plays a role in that, and it adds some clean energy value as well. But the opportunities with solar are huge because of a couple things. The costs have declined by 90% in the last 15 years, 90%. And Chairman, you mentioned, isn't that amazing? That's amazing, but I'll tell you my opinion on that is because of mass production. It's just like the first car was very expensive, but you build 1 million of them and all of a sudden the price goes down, and that's what's happened there. The benefits are that lower price. The benefits are it does help stabilize the grid in certain cases, and that's also a challenge because intermittency does create challenges as well. The challenges are being good stewards of our property, the property that our developers own, and making sure that we are good citizens in the neighborhood. Fortunately, we have a great partner in that regard and has done 95% of our solar projects, and I'll show you a couple examples and share that with you. One of the more interesting things that has occurred to me is that the economic development engine that this state has, it's number one in, ranked by one of the major magazines that deal with energy, but deal with site selection. But here's what's fascinating to me is that renewable energy and clean energy and affordable energy and reliable energy was a major cornerstone for this state being very popular for new economic development and growth and jobs. We are purchasing most of our solar panels from American companies. And many of them, we're getting as much as we can produced actually in the United States. In fact, Q-Cells in Dalton, Georgia is expanding by 3 times in the next few years. And we're fortunate to actually manufacture some of these facilities here. We use it to produce clean energy in Georgia. We use it to provide lower prices for homeowners. And by the way, we don't import, we're reducing what we import from other states and other countries. Granted, some of these materials are coming from China, supply chain issues with China coming from those sort of organizations, but that's starting to change. It will take a while to make that happen. But we import our coal over 3,000 miles to get it to Georgia. And that's a long ways. That money goes out of state. In the process that we're trying to create here in Georgia, we're trying to keep that money in the state by doing a little bit more solar. Will we do a lot of solar in the future? I think we will. I think it's going to be economic based. Do I think it'll be a major part of our portfolio? It can't yet. Someday it might can, but it can't today because the technology to control an intermittent resource when the sun's not shining and the battery storage it would take to rely on solar completely is just not there yet. It's coming along, but we're talking about decades before that happens. But as Dr. Gaddy said, we have approached this in a very organized, methodical way, bringing on solar as it adds value. We're not doing it just to be green. We're doing it because it adds economic value, and we don't bring on more than we need for reliability. So it's really helpful. Let's talk about land use just a minute. Fortunately, and I would like to tell you it was by good decision making, but sometimes you find yourself with a good business partner in the company that we use for most of our solar, Silicon Ranch. They have a unique business model. They own all their property. They're citizens in those communities. They have a long-term view of ownership and maintenance of property itself. Our solar projects in general, by 2024, will have invested almost $3 billion into the state. So far, we're paying through our purchase agreements with companies like Silicon Ranch about $200 million a year in personal and in real property tax. In some of these counties, it doesn't take much solar for you to be the largest taxpayer in the county and add some real value without putting a lot of pressure on resources like water and other resources that it takes for other types of development. Do you want all your land in your county to be used for solar? Absolutely not. Do we want all of it in the state to be used for solar? I think I'm really glad this committee and this council is thinking about that, because we want to be very thoughtful about how we use one of our few resources we have in the state to generate energy. And that's, and I think I applaud you for that and want to work with you to make that happen. Right now, our projects, this sounds kind of trivial and trite in a way, but all of our projects, I say 95% of all of our projects will have regenerative agriculture practices on the property going forward. Right now we have about 1,000 sheep in these sites, but what do you need for sheep? You need very stable, good ground cover. Well, you have to have good ground cover, but you have to manage that ground cover, and that's not easy to do. The regenerative process for using sheep, by the way, we don't use goats. There's a good reason for that. Goats will eat the cable. They will climb on the panels. They're fun to watch, but sheep are a little more boring. But they don't we can still produce energy and keep things moving. Well, by the end of the decade, we're projected to have over 10,000 sheep in the state on these farms. And no, it's not row crop, and no, it's not cattle, but what it is agriculture, bringing back some agriculture back to these sites, managing the land. And by the way, when these sites, if they're ever remediated and you pull the solar out, the land will be much better than it is today because of this regenerative, holistic way of looking at the property. Couple more points. Again, fortunate to work with entities that have recycling programs for the modules as they end their useful life. Most of our modules come from an American company called First Solar, and those they have a very strong recycling program that is necessary. I think we find necessary to make sure it's happening, and we look forward to hopefully continuing a really strong engagement with our communities, being good citizens, being good energy providers, and managing this transition in a thoughtful way that keeps everything balanced and affordable and reliable and cleaner when we can. Sure. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Questions? Somebody's got to have a question. Jason,
Okay.
do you want to add anything to the conversation, or you're going? Okay. Well, then, hold on, Jeff.
Okay.
In that, why are your, I mean, I think this looks better, and you can have the sheep so that you're just not covering up farmland with these big panels like you see along going down, I think 75 has a big thing. Is it just your land management style to put the solar panels at an angle and up, or is it a different kind of solar panel?
Yeah, so most of the solar panel installations today, and have been for the last 5 years or so, track the sun from east to west. So these panels are oriented that way, but in the middle of the day, they'll be parallel to the ground. So that way they are more oriented toward where the sun's at. In the morning, they'll be flipped the other direction and be facing the sunshine as it comes up in the morning, assuming this was an afternoon shot here.
So that's probably the way, I must go down 75 at the same time of day when they're all flat?
That's right, yeah.
I didn't realize that they moved. Okay.
That's
Learn
exactly
something every
it.
day.
Yeah, and we can produce about 20% more energy out of the facility. Dr. Gaddy showed you the pictures of the little of the amount of solar for the amount of that gray area. In Georgia, we do a little better than that, largely because we're using this kind of technology.
Okay. And Jeff, that's part of the reason why a lot of the rooftop stuff is not as popular, is because y'all have that technology now that can track the sun and
it'll produce, rooftop solar is about 2 times more expensive to produce the same electron. It's about maybe as much as 3. It doesn't produce as much, not as efficient, and it's also gains a lot of heat on that roof, and that reduces its efficiency as well. I'm not saying rooftop solar is not a good thing. There is a place for it, but again, if you can reduce, again, it's about being able to maintain these facilities reliably. You can do that when they're in scale, and secondly, the cost and affordability of energy fits better with these larger facilities.
Representative Yerda.
Thank you for being with us today. Appreciate what the Oglethorpe and the EMCs are doing in regard to solar, and got a good project in Lee County, which is in my district. We're proud of. But my question: all of your projects are power purchase agreements with a company. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay.
Virtually all of them. We have a few that we own and operate, but they're relatively small, and our larger projects today are through power purchase agreements.
Right. Would you envision that changing any in the future, that you may look at doing bigger projects and things like that?
We're evaluating that. Heretofore, we have not. It's hard for a not-for-profit co-op to monetize tax credits.
Right. Yeah.
And going forward, there are some avenues with the new got to be careful, IRA bill, right? I usually say Investment Reduction Act, and that's wrong. Inflation, that's wrong too, so sorry.
Right.
But with that bill, it does provide some opportunities for co-ops to directly, I'm not sure it's going to be the right answer for us. I'm sure we'll do some, but it might be, we're evaluating it, and the rules haven't came out yet.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At each one of these meetings, I normally ask a really dumb question. I think this one might happen now. So I'm really not aware of how the energy that is converted from sunlight, does it go to immediately into the grid? Is it stored in batteries and then goes to grid? Is there opportunities going forward in research with some of my friends at UGA and Georgia Tech and Georgia Southwestern that can do research in capacitance? So this energy we have harnessed from the sun. It is stored in a battery, and when the lights go out, the sun goes down, as it does every single day. There's additional opportunities for greater efficiencies with the solar we have invested in. Or is it all just leach through the system immediately, go into the grid, and none is stored for latter use?
That's one of the best questions I've heard today, so it's a good question, and I'll tell you why I like it is because it gives you a window in where the industry is going. We're not there yet. But today, when solar power is produced, it goes straight to the grid, and we balance everything else around solar and, frankly, nuclear energy production and the load. We turn gas plants up and down, coal plants to some degree, and we do all that, but we take all the solar energy at 100% today because as much as they can provide is it's usually right there is the least expensive kilowatt we can generate. But in the future, that's the reason there's a cap of some sort on how much solar we can do without causing more harm to reliability. California is an easy one to talk about there. They incentivized solar energy, and this is my way of thinking about this. They incentivized rooftop solar energy to a great degree, got a huge amount of it, and took away, as Dr. Gaddy said, some of the other resources that would let you balance the grid as that energy came on. Now they went and say, well, we created this problem, let's incentivize batteries and help fix it. And now let's incentivize something else and let's fix it. What we're doing is not adopting technologies like batteries until we can use them to add value So where this is going long-term, maybe, if the technology keeps going that way, is will we use batteries to store energy, as you said, when we don't need it, and use it at times when we do need it. And in that, I'm talking about solar energy, and there's different pathways. Batteries, there's hydrogen opportunities, maybe someday. There's something called long duration storage, and these are batteries that you put in 100 hours worth of energy into them, you get 100 hours out. And that's huge. That's a huge change if that technology can be realized, because then, as Dr. Gaddy said, we will be able to use solar energy more productively and be able to use it to maintain reliability in a better way. But we're not there yet. I'm really proud of Georgia not incentivizing the next new technology only to create another problem that we have to fix. Right now, our structure, our Public Service Commission, our regulatory structure allows us to do it thoughtfully and do it in a way that doesn't jeopardize our grid and our economic development in the state. So, long answer to your question, but it's an important one. It is.
Two quick questions, Jeff. If you could speak to, I noticed, and Georgia Power may touch on this, but I noticed in their slides that they sent earlier, there was a lot of approval through the PSC that they had to go through to do their projects. Do y'all have to do similar stuff through them? And then maybe could you speak to some of the remediation plans that maybe Silicon Ranch has in their contracts as far as what's going to happen in 25 or 30 years when these panels are end of life?
Yeah, those are good points, and there's two things there. The first part was about the, not the remediation, bear with me, tell me the first part again. The governance part, yes. So, no, the Public Service Commission doesn't have purview over whether or not we build these plants and directly. But what we do have is, I would say, for some of the topics in this meeting is even more helpful is the local governance of the boards of directors that are in the communities where these facilities are located. One thing I thought about when we did the project there, 75 South, that big one there you see south of Perry in Elko, it's either going to be one of the most interesting, well thought of projects, or it may be one of the lightning rods for the industry because it's so visible. Our goal is to make sure we tell the story, and we will have sheep on that property. We'll have probably 1,000 sheep, 700 sheep on that property as they are born and raised. So I think our processes are not the same as Georgia Power, but they are similar. And I think that the Silicon Ranch's ownership of the property is a very key part of what we do here, because they're going to remain citizens in the community. And by the way, if they're not, please let me know, because those plants would not be operational if we weren't writing them checks, okay? And I absolutely do not want one of my co-op managers calling me about a bad actor because of projects we're doing. So we have a lot of influence there to help make that reasonable. We are going to look at more of the affidavit type of work that Georgia Power has in their process. I think it's a good one. Fortunately, we haven't had a strong need for it because of the good actors that we have contracted with it to do it. Remediation. So remediation, when you own the property, you have a lot better incentive to make sure it's remediated and put to useful work. So again, our choice of partners to do this work has put us in a position to really be, I would say, leaders in land management in the country with respect to solar projects. But not, they also, when I mentioned earlier, they source their panels from First Solar, many of their panels from First Solar. That company is one of the few that set up serious recycling programs for those panels going forward. So we need to shore up our practices there. But fortunately, we're doing all the right things by selecting suppliers that are very thoughtful in how they do business.
Good deal. Chairman Green.
Thank you. We've heard all of this about the project itself, but I want the members of the House to know how much money that comes back into the communities that Silicon Ranch gives to so many of our for our projects in the community, our libraries and our schools and the chambers. These are needed resources, and they are reinvesting in our communities and work real hard. And this is from Will Harris's sheep down there, Early County. And I'd like to invite y'all all to come and look at this project. You'd be amazed at what's going on there.
Thank you. All right, Jeff, I think that's it.
Thank you very much.
Jason, you. Okay, go ahead. You're up there.
Well, while he's getting that set up, I'll go ahead and start since I know we're under time. My name is Jason Bragg. I know most of you in the room, Vice President of Government Relations with Georgia EMC. Just wanted to provide the committee and council and the chairman, both chairmen had asked us to provide an update quickly on EMC broadband projects since the passage of Senate Bill 2, which obviously most of you around this table played a key role in the passage of that bill, and obviously it was just such a brainchild of former Chairman Jay Powell. As you can see on our map, we have a map here listed on to the right, and I think Leo's included this in your folders. That this is a list of every existing EMC broadband project we currently have. As you can see, those two in the green at the very top were in existence prior to the passage of Senate Bill 2 in 2019. So we had two of our co-ops. Currently, where we sit today, we have 21 of our state's 41 EMCs that are involved in some sort of broadband project, whether that is providing it directly through an affiliate ISP that is a subsidiary of the co-op, or whether that is working with a partner like Connexon, Windstream, ETC, Darien Telephone, and others that we're working with around the state. So I just want to applaud you on what you've done for Senate Bill 2. It is really, amongst our co-ops, opened the doors to a variety of different business models. It truly allows our members to look at what works best in their community. Obviously, each one of these territories is going to have different needs, different levels of unserved. I know it's kind of hard to see, but we've kind of overlaid this map with the served. I guess this was the 2020, or excuse me, the 20, I think the most recent served and unserved data from the state that is in the served areas in the dark yellow and the unserved are in the light. You can probably see that a little better, the ones that you may have in front of you. But as you can see, a lot of our projects are going in areas with high percentages of unserved areas. That's something that we're really proud of. I know that we have co-op managers working all across the state. We have one with us here today from Sumter EMC, Renee Smith. Renee and his team at Sumter is involved with a project with Windstream that's very exciting and bringing broadband to this area and the membership of Sumter EMC. So, there's a lot of thought being going on around this in EMC territory, whether it's at the board level, whether it's at the staff level at the co-op. And, I know that some of the funding opportunities that we have put up here, I know that Jessica and her team are probably going to discuss these further, so I really won't go into them, but I will tell you that there has not been a federal or state funding program that I'm aware of, at least going back to, I think going back to 2018, 2019, that one of our EMCs in Georgia has not at least attempted to participate, some more than others. Obviously back when we were doing this back in 2019, I know Chairman England and some of those of you that are with me, we were begging for the state to invest money because there was just nothing out there for some of these networks, because obviously the reality is where a lot of these unserved areas were, if it was profitable to go there, people would have gone there a long time ago, and it's just not, and it takes money. Fortunately, this is really, broadband access has really been a priority for the federal government. There are a number of different funding streams. As he said, I won't get into them. I'll let the broadband team talk about that a little later, but there's really a lot of opportunity out there in the market for our EMCs to go work with partners and others to try to help close that digital divide. I just, I wanted to close by saying a couple of things about our projects that I just wanted to mention very briefly. Most of them, I think almost, probably over 95%, maybe even 97% are fiber to the home. These are providing gig speed internet in a lot of locations. I think you'll find from what I've seen around the state, a lot of these projects and partnerships were first announced back in 2021, so they're just starting to connect customers in the last few months or maybe the last couple of quarters. We're seeing very good take rates in some of those projects that are further down the line than others. So still a lot of work left to be done. We're facing the same challenges that a lot of other industries are facing with labor shortages, supply chain shortages, and other things that are putting the squeeze on what us and really all broadband providers around the state are having to do in terms of just the amount of build out going on here. But it's something that my members are very proud to have played a role in. And, they wanted to not only thank you guys and the members of this Rural Development Council, but all the members of the legislature. The governor's office, the PSC has had have all had leading roles in helping create an environment that helps us close that digital gap, which I know is just such a priority for this committee and such a priority for a lot of you in the areas you represent, because I know you get calls frequently of when is broadband coming to my area. I know those come up to me, and I know they come up to a lot of these people in this room. And I'm just very proud of the work that our EMCs are doing. And if we can ever be of assistance to you on the broadband front, please let me know. Happy to answer any questions you may have now at the time, or happy to answer any questions or anything else the committee may need, Chairman Watson.
All right, real quick, Representative Williams.
Yeah.
Quickly, there's a little area that me and Chairman Stevens are very interested in, one of the finest in the country. You know what you did from down there. Tell us a little bit of that coastal line from Darien.
Yeah, so the coastal EMC project. Yes, sir. Representative Williams was down there when we kicked that off. That is a kind of a unique project that Coastal Electric Cooperative, which is down on the coast, serves basically based in Midway, serves down to right north of St. Simons and kind of along that I-95 corridor. They are working in a project partnership with Darien Telephone and have created a subsidiary called Coastal Fiber that is being built out now as we speak that will provide broadband access in that area. I know it's an area that Representative Williams knows very well. It was a high-need area, he was there to help us kick that project off, and we're very excited about the things that could be done, not only in that area of coastal Georgia, but obviously a lot of these other areas, because we serve a large portion. As you know, Jeff showed you the what we call the red map earlier. We serve 73% of the state's landmass area, and it's a lot of people, and it's not a lot of people per mile. So there's always going to be challenges, but we're happy to see, especially projects like that down in Southeast Georgia, where two local companies work together to really benefit the community.
Thank you, sir.
Deal. All right, well, thank you, Jason. Appreciate what y'all are doing there and the partnerships that y'all have developed with other folks in that business to grow broadband across our state. So appreciate what y'all are doing there.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, next up, we've got Georgia Large Scale Solar Association and Advanced Power Alliance, Brad Carver. Oh, did I skip one? I'm sorry. Vice Chair's keeping me straight here. Georgia Power, Wilson Mallard. Come on down. Sorry about that, Wilson. Trying to speed things up here.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Mr. Chair, council members, commissioners. Beautiful day. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and tell you a little bit about solar in Georgia from Georgia Power's perspective. But yeah, I'm happy to be down here. A similar feeling that Dr. Gaddy talked about, a little bit different. My dad's side of the family is from right down the road here in Randolph County, and as I was driving in, beautiful morning, reminded me sort of Christmas morning going to get presents at Grandma's house, but I was struck by the agriculture, the forestry, the industry, and thinking about how solar plays a role in that and how it fits in to the state, to the regions, to cities and counties, and how what we can do to make sure that those benefits are maximized in the local communities. I'm going to repeat a few of the themes that we've heard already, but hopefully have a little bit different take on these. And y'all, I'm happy to answer questions while we go. Just yell. Otherwise, we can definitely answer them at the end. I will repeat the theme that solar is extremely beneficial to Georgia. We are right in the middle of this energy transition, and we've talked about less reliance on coal, more solar, more renewables. What does that look like to the grid? What solar does bring is extremely low cost, we talked about that, and clean energy to the state. And it does allow us to invest locally in that energy supply. We've already talked about not maybe sending money out of state to buy energy, but to be able to generate some of our own energy here locally and have those benefits accrue in the cities and the counties where the solar facilities are located. It does support economic development, and I can't overemphasize this enough, y'all. Beyond the 5,000 plus employees that work in the solar industry in Georgia, and we are growing the industry in Georgia. There's lots of permanent jobs here in the state. We talked about manufacturers of solar panels. There's manufacturers of solar piles that the panels sit on. Of course, all the associated wiring and equipment to go into a solar facility. But beyond that, economic development, as we think about being the number one place to do business and to attract these very large businesses to Georgia, I can't tell y'all over and over again, access to, first of all, low cost, also high reliability, but can these large business prospects access renewable energy, low carbon energy in a way that helps them meet their goals? It is as important as I've ever seen it. I've been working on solar for the better part of 20 years now, and the conversation just continues to get more and more around how can I access solar energy. That puts us in a really good place to compete. Because first of all, we've got the low cost, we've got the high reliability. Now if we're able to offer access to solar, we do it at Georgia Power through subscription programs, so these big customers can sign up and subscribe to the output of a big solar facility. It's a big deal, and it's a differentiator between Georgia and some of the other states that we compete for auto manufacturers and data centers and the other types of economic development prospects that you guys are familiar with. So real quickly, let me just talk about the components of a solar farm. And we've seen some different versions of these pictures already. With very much respect to Mr. Cooley, I would say that the vast majority of solar farms that I've seen and I'm familiar with look more like that one on the left. Are they perfect? No, they're not. There's grass growing. There's not grass growing everywhere. But that's a really big deal in siting and developing a solar facility. Y'all, the components are relatively straightforward. It's pretty modular to construct solar. There's a steel pile in the ground. There's metal aluminum racking normally across those piles. The solar panels themselves, they're about 90% of the weight is glass. And then there's silicon and the wiring in there. The remainder of the solar facility is the wiring to connect the combiner boxes, a piece of equipment called an inverter that turns direct current electricity into alternating current, which is what the grid runs on. But generally speaking, it's a relatively straightforward and low impact construction process. One of the most important parts of developing a solar facility is the civil work. And we're always thinking about that when we think about where's the best place to site a solar facility. So proximity to electricity lines is really important. And you got to be able to send the power back to the grid. And then you're looking for flat land, so you don't have to do as much grading. The further south in the state, it is true you get a better solar resource, but it's not to say you can't have viable solar projects in the northern part of the state. And shoot, they're installing solar as quick as they can in the New Jerseys and Michigans and places like that. So solar will work anywhere in Georgia. But it's a relatively straightforward process to be able to pick a piece of property, to mitigate those environmental impacts, and then to install a solar facility is a relatively straightforward process and relatively minimally impactful as we think about the life of a solar facility for the next 30 years. Solar's actually a pretty good neighbor. I know there are probably differences of opinion on whether you want to look out your window and see a field of solar panels or not, but they're quiet, they don't make any noise, they don't make any smell, they are generally good neighbors. We've seen what the EMCs do with hosting livestock there. Generally speaking, they're good neighbors and not as significantly impactful to the land that they're installed on. All right, let me take a step back and talk about solar growing in Georgia. And if I can, I'm going to take just a second to brag just a little bit. We've heard that Georgia's a leading state for business. The underpinning of that is our energy market. And I would just say that studying electricity markets around the country, looking at how some of the different states, deregulated or not, are growing solar, the way that we're doing it in Georgia, between Georgia Power and the EMC municipal partners, it's as good as anywhere else in the country because we don't have mandates like you might have in California or some other places. We don't have any particular goals, but what we do is we try to evolve the mix of generation sources to serve our customers based on the value that customers can get from those sources. And so we've talked about coal being de-emphasized, yes. We've talked about natural gas going up, absolutely. This graph shows the growth of solar in a relatively quick, short amount of time, just back to 2015, and the growth has been significant, and the reason is solar has become cost effective. The reasons have already been stated. Those costs came down significantly. That cost curve for solar has been incredible over the last 20 years, primarily because of just a lot of economies of scale, a lot of driving down the cost to produce solar. And we're to a point now where we might be seeing that curve slow down a little bit. Supply chain, inflation, all of those things. The drop in cost is not as much as recently as what we've seen. So in steps the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, and without going into too many details, it's already been said, but I'll just reiterate, it is going to be a big deal. Extending the policy support for solar for the next 10 years, it's in place until 2032, that certainty of the tax credit, the ability of developer of solar or wind or some of the other resources to be able to access that benefit is really going to make these projects that much more cost effective. And that's good for Georgians. We can save the debate on the effectiveness of the policy at a federal level for another time, but those dollars are out there. And so the ability to get a 30% investment tax credit if you do what the act requires and pay prevailing wages and have an apprenticeship program. Then some additional adders. Y'all, there's additional 10% adder if you can use domestically sourced materials for solar and storage. We talked about developing that domestic supply chain, if you will. The IRA certainly supports that. There's additional tax credits, additional benefits available if you can site the renewable facilities on or near the location of a closed coal plant. All that together, and the drops in solar and cost of solar that we've seen, it is going to continue to grow, and it is good for Georgians. What we need to do is to make sure that we're doing it in the right way, in the best way. And again, our entire energy market here in Georgia, but specifically the regulated model that Georgia Power falls under, it's working just as good as it can. We go in front of a Public Service Commission every 3 years in our integrated resource planning process and the commission decides after hearing from Georgia Power and what our plan is, just about the most robust and diverse group of interveners that you can think of, 20 plus interveners this last time, listening to all of the reasons behind how we generate electricity, the need that we have to strengthen the grid, the transmission and distribution lines, the load that we have to serve for customers. We're in a good place. Georgia continues to grow. We have load that we need to serve. Through that integrated resource planning process, finding out how much solar to add, And I'll talk about a couple other renewables on this chart in just a second, but it's predominantly solar here in Georgia. The amount to add, the type to add, whether it be utility scale, distributed generation, rooftop solar, certainly plays a role. And then the speed at which to add it, and Dr. Gaddy and Jeff Pratt just both talked about this. We got to make sure we do it at a pace that does not negatively impact that reliability that customers have come to expect, but to do it in a way that does take advantage of those dropping costs and then shields us from potential future risks. So there's risks out there for future carbon regulation or price at a federal level. There's risk for investment. And gosh, it'd be a hard time to probably get coal in another 20 years. The coal companies are having a hard time finding investors to continue to find that resource. How do we make sure that we have that diversified set of resources here in Georgia to serve customers? That's what we do every day. That's the group that I'm in. That's exactly what we do in that 3-year integrated resource planning process. It's almost not fast enough. We have to go back. Things are changing so quickly, but that process just works like a well-oiled machine for us to consider all of those potential future outcomes and figure out how much solar to add. So how much have we added? Well, a lot. Here we sit right here in 2022. Georgia Power alone has over 3,300 megawatts of renewables on the ground. Just as a reminder, like a super Walmart's about a megawatt. So Georgia Power's total peak, when we peak serving customers in the summer afternoon or winter morning, is in the 17,000 megawatt range. So we're already up to about 3,300, and we've committed through this IRP, when the Public Service Commission approved earlier this summer, we're headed towards almost 8,000 megawatts. So that's significant. And the impacts of solar, the benefits that solar can deliver are coming. And again, the impact that solar has, not just from a system operation, but from the locales in which the solar facilities choose to site, those are all going to continue to be important and even grow in importance. A couple other things I'll point out before I move on for this one. Solar is the vast majority. That's the yellow. Look along the bottom, that's biomass. Biomass is in green. Georgia has a really good biomass resource. Tends to be more expensive than solar, but there's a lot of resource, and especially in the southern, southwestern part of the state with all the forestry operations, the ability to use some of that wood waste to generate electricity is a good thing for Georgians. Wind. We don't have much wind in Georgia. The little blue bar you see on that chart, that's wind that's wheeled in from Oklahoma, Kansas, that area. If you've ever driven out across the country, you see where all the wind turbines are. They've got a better wind resource out there. So they tend to be wind heavy out there. In the southern tier of the country, it's solar heavy, and it's just taking advantage of the resource that each region has. Then the last thing is the little pink box. Again, it's been talked about, but I just want to reiterate, battery energy storage is going to be extremely important to maintain the reliability of the electricity in Georgia. In addition, it's going to be really important to make sure we can keep adding solar, because we'll get to the point where we're generating a lot of solar on a day like this that maybe is not a big heating or air conditioning day, and there's not enough load to use the solar, if you think about that. Battery energy storage, having those storage devices on the grid to soak up the excess solar and then be able to deliver it back to the grid when it's needed, it's just going to be critical. Up to now, the history of the electricity system, there really hasn't been large-scale storage up until just the last few years, and you can imagine why. It's because it's been expensive, but the costs are really coming down on battery energy storage. Predominant technology is still lithium-ion, which is the same battery that's in your phone and just at a bigger scale, but there are some new technologies that are likely to emerge that are going to allow us to take advantage, to drive costs down on battery energy storage as the grid transforms, if you will. Okay, let me dive down just for a second. I will not spend a whole lot of time on this, but I just would like to provide you a few details on Georgia Power's procurement process, how we add the solar. Everybody knows we're regulated by the Georgia Public Service Commission. through those IRP processes, we get approved for how much solar to go try to procure. And then Georgia Power procures about 90% of what we buy through purchase power agreements. We run requests for proposals, and the market then responds, and it's really competitive here in Georgia. It's driving down the price where we can get solar PPAs for about 3 cents a kilowatt hour. So really good deal for our customers to lock in that price for 30 years. We then go through an evaluation to choose the projects that have the best mix of price, of production, taking into account their environmental impacts, taking into account all the impacts that the solar facility has, where it's located in the state, what any transmission or distribution costs may be. There is an enhanced environmental review process that's part of our RFPs now, and we're extremely sensitive to protected species or potentially protected species. The bidders will submit an affidavit to say that they've done everything that they're supposed to do, but now we've even added a second. There's a double barrel environmental compliance where we require the bidders to show that they have engaged with the proper authorities on the local level, at the state level, that they're doing everything that they're supposed to do. Ultimately, it is a local decision. When Georgia Power is purchasing the energy from these third parties, we don't pick the site. They've picked the site, they've developed the site, they've worked with the local authorities to locate and to mitigate all of the impacts. We then choose the projects that provide the most value to our customers. But the takeaway here is there is a significant amount of oversight. It's our desire, our expectation that all of our counterparties are really acting the same way that Georgia Power would act if we were building the same facilities. Speaking of which, Georgia Power does build some of our own facilities, and I know y'all are probably aware of the ones at the military bases. There's most recent 2 are at Moody Air Force Base in Robbins, but there's Georgia Power owned solar facilities at military bases at all the major military bases here in Georgia. And we take great pride in those. Those are really good partnerships between Georgia Power, the local community, and the bases themselves provide a lot of benefits all the way around. But just so you know, for the Georgia Power self-build projects, all of these assets have an asset removal obligation, and I would argue to you that most of the big solar developers are going to have the same thing. They've got this built into their financials, y'all. They don't want to get to the end of life and not have the money available to comply with the zoning or the ordinances that they're subject to in their local city or county. So this is what Georgia Power does. I can't speak to what the third-party developers do, but it's almost certainly something similar to this. And that asset removal obligation will require us to bring the site back to very close to its original state. Now, honestly, if I had to predict what's going to be happening in 30 years, that's a site that's already got electricity generation on it. It's probably already zoned for it. It's already got an interconnection. There'd be a really good chance that there would just be a repowering, new panels, latest technology, all those things, and it continues as a generation facility. But if not, that asset removal obligation would allow Georgia Power or another developer to have the funds available to return the property back to the way that it was. The equipment, as I mentioned, it's a lot of steel and copper and panels. The solar panel recycling industry still developing now. If you think about it, there's not tons of solar facilities at their end of life now, but as we get further in time, as more and more solar facilities do get to the end of life, it's the expectation that the recycling is going to become extremely robust. Almost every part of a solar facility is recyclable. Glass, as I mentioned, is kind of by weight, kind of the biggest component in there. And so I would expect that the vast majority of equipment in a solar installation would be recyclable at the end of life. Last slide, and then I'll open it up. I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm not an expert on this, but I know a little bit about it. I think there's probably some folks here in the room that know more about it, but just to make everybody aware, there is a Georgia Solar Model Ordinance that was put together by, it was a collaboration between Georgia and Emory and Georgia Tech a few years back, I think 2018. And really, the purpose here was to create something that can be a tool for the local county commissions and zoning authorities and all those involved that may not be as familiar with solar. Hey, this is something new, this is different, we're not used to how this might impact our community. And so these universities put together a really comprehensive document that can be accessed out there. I went and clicked on it this morning. You can pull it down, and it has just model ordinances, things to think about. I mean, down into the weeds on setbacks and what type of pollinators would you recommend, and all of the things that we've talked about here today. And this is a tool that local cities and counties can use, because ultimately that is who's probably in the best position to make those decisions. Each county is different. These solar facilities are provide a tax base. They're, like I said, they're good, quiet neighbors. Would you want every acre in the county covered with solar? Well, obviously not. But if each county can think about their situation, what their land is like, what their economy is like, what their tax base is like, and understand the benefits that solar can bring to a particular region, county, city, then leverage tools and best practices like this Georgia Solar Model Ordinance. It's a really good way to think about a replicable way for counties to get all the information and make the decision that's best for them as we think about land use and where solar is best suited.
All right, good job. Questions? I think everybody's hungry. Real quick, the end-of-life obligation. So, and this may be more for the developers, but just to get your take on it, how do you know what something's going to cost 30 years from now?
That's a really good question. There's a couple of ways to do it. One is to just plug in a flat escalator based on inflation. That's probably the prevailing way to do it. There's a couple other ways you could do it. You could sort of index an amount of money, so you could make sure that if you indexed it to a particular price of something else, you might could hedge is a best way to put it. The developer could put some money in an investment that's going to grow at the same rate of the cost of recycling those things. So I've seen both of those happen before.
Quick follow-up on that is I know EMC said that Silicon Ranch owned all their land, and I assume, and y'all were in purchase power agreements with maybe somebody else, but then I know there's landowners out there that they own the land.
Mm-hmm.
How does all that, how do you know that there is an end of life if the developer doesn't own the land and the landowner owns the land?
So when Georgia Power builds it, obviously we know, and we generally enter into long-term leases. 30-year leases is the expected life of solar these days, so we know. When we're dealing with a third party, we don't know, and we don't have a line of sight into their individual agreements, although I'll say the majority of them that I'm aware of, they don't purchase the land themselves. They're entering into long-term leases as well. But what we do have, and I brought it for a prop, so I'm glad you asked. That's all the documentation that goes out when we issue an RFP and our purchase power agreements, and there's statement after statement in there that require these counterparties to remain in compliance with all local ordinances, applicable laws, and so we're going to hold them accountable. Georgia Power is still going to be here in 30 years. Counties are still going to be here in 30 years, and somebody's going to be owning that solar facility in 30 years because it's still going to be generating income. So between those entities and the obligations that are agreed to in these purchase power agreements, we feel like that's pretty strong. That's going to be able to require the behaviors that need to happen 30 years from now.
Okay. Final question. Do you know about how many acres of solar that y'all purchase power off of across the state, roughly?
I can't give you an absolute number, but I'll give you some numbers to give you an idea. So generally speaking, a megawatt of solar takes up about 5 acres. Okay, so recently we've seen the size of these utility scale solar projects go up to about 200 or so megawatts. Gosh, there's one big one that's like 260. But that could be as much as 1,000 acres or so for one of these big solar farms if it's a couple of hundred megawatts. That said, I did do some quick math and looked at all 3,300 of Georgia Power's megawatts and then compared that to the total land in the state and then also the agricultural land in the state. So right now, it looks like solar is taking up about 0.1% of the total land in the state and only about 0.3% of the agricultural land in the state, although I found 3 different numbers for agricultural land depending on where I looked. And you look at, we're going to triple what we're doing over the next 10 years ago. All that said, it's still relatively small. We absolutely need to make sure that we're doing what we need to do to ensure the compliance and proper land use and all those things, but it's still relatively small at this point if you think about the total agricultural land in Georgia.
Representative Yerda.
Just a quick question. One of the incentives in the new bill that came out in August was to possibly locate solar on shuttered, perhaps coal plants. Is that a very practical option in your opinion?
Yes, it can be. And so speaking just from Georgia Power's perspective, we've been purchasing through purchase power agreements most of our solar because we can't monetize those tax credits, or couldn't in the past, as good as a third party. The new IRA actually changed the rules a little bit, and so instead of just an investment tax credit, we can now use a production tax credit. So we're really excited that that's going to put Georgia Power and other electricity providers in a better position to be competitive. And so yeah, absolutely. Thinking about being able to get that extra 10% if you locate a plant on or near a closed coal site. We've absolutely looked at Georgia Power coal, former coal generating sites. My team's actually got a pretty significant evaluation underway right now where we're evaluating not just former plant sites, but all Georgia Power land and really looking at the whole state. Where are the next best places? But we're excited about the opportunities that the IRA might level the playing field a little bit, and Georgia Power would be owning more solar and battery energy storage as we go forward.
All right, anybody else? All right, thank you, Wilson. Appreciate that information. Great presentation. I'm going to ask Stephen Snyder with Georgia State to come on up and talk to us about lunch. We're going to break for lunch. We've running a little behind schedule, so we're going to ask Georgia Large Scale Solar and Brad Carver and those guys to come up right after lunch. And so we're going to break for lunch and allow you an opportunity to walk the campus here at Georgia Southwestern. So, Stephen.
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to share information about lunch. That makes me the most popular man in the room right now, but also means I need to be brief. All right, so you're here at Building A, and we have a couple options here on campus. We have a Chick-fil-A Express, which is just around the corner to my right, and it is Building C right here. So that's one option for lunch. And we also have our cafeteria, which is open to anyone. A lot of choices for food there. And that is in Building S, over to my left. It's a buffet style, one price, and you can get all the food you want. You'll be in there with students. I hope that's okay. There's also some overflow rooms to sit. But like I said, a lot of options with the cafeteria, in addition to Chick-fil-A over to my right. So that's it.
Deal.
I was initially called in them.
It depends. I think Dr. Weaver, he mentioned that key that he has earlier today. He keeps those kind of things in a separate room. So, yeah, so cafeteria to my left, Chick-fil-A to my right.
All right, it's 12 o'clock. Let's be back here at 1 o'clock, members. Thank y'all.